Misty Copsey was born in 1978 to Diana Smith and Buck Copsey, who were in the process of separating at the time of her birth. Shortly afterward, her parents divorced and Misty grew up primarily under the care of her mother. For much of her childhood, Misty and Diana lived in a mobile home community called Green Meadows in Puyallup, Washington. Misty was popular among her peers, known for her outgoing and charismatic personality. She excelled academically and participated actively in sports such as softball, basketball, and volleyball. In 1992, Diana moved with Misty from their trailer park home to a duplex in nearby Spanaway, hoping to provide a more stable living environment. Although Spanaway was close to their former neighborhood on South Hill, the move introduced Misty to a new community where she initially had fewer friends. Diana often worked nights as a caregiver for an elderly woman, leaving Misty all alone at home. Despite this arrangement, their relationship remained positive. On September 17, 1992, Misty convinced her mother to allow her to attend the Puyallup Fair without any supervision. She planned to attend the fair with her friend Trina Brevard, but transportation posed an issue since Diana would be working overnight and could not provide a ride home. To secure permission from Trina's parents for the outing, Diana agreed to tell them she would drive both girls home after the fair, a lie intended to help Misty enjoy an evening out with friends. On that evening, Misty borrowed a pair of jeans from her mother, baggy stonewashed denim pants that were visibly oversized on her frame. She paired these jeans with a dark blue sweatshirt and brown suede shoes. Diana vividly remembered how small and fragile Misty appeared in those oversized clothes as she watched her daughter cross the street toward the fairgrounds. At around 8:40 p.m., after enjoying several hours at the fairgrounds with Trina, Misty realized that they had missed their scheduled bus back home. She used a payphone to call her mom at work, explaining their predicament. During this conversation, Misty mentioned that she might be able to get a ride home from an older acquaintance named Reuben Schmidt. Schmidt was an 18-year-old neighbor whom Misty had known since childhood when they both lived in the trailer park. However, Diana distrusted Schmidt due to his age difference and previous inappropriate behavior toward Misty. On one occasion, she overheard him make suggestive comments during a phone call with her daughter. Consequently, she explicitly instructed Misty not to accept a ride from Schmidt under any circumstances. After ending the call with her mother, Misty faced limited options for returning home safely. According to later accounts from Trina, the two girls separated after leaving the fairgrounds. Trina eventually secured transportation from her 23-year-old boyfriend Michael Reiner. Misty reportedly declined joining them because she did not trust Reiner or feel comfortable accepting his offer of transportation. Left alone without transportation options or companions, Misty decided to walk the approximately 8-mile distance back home, a daunting journey for anyone late at night, but especially risky for an unaccompanied teenage girl unfamiliar with walking such distances alone after dark. Witness accounts placed Misty's last confirmed sighting between approximately 9:20 and 10 p.m. walking along Meridian Avenue near downtown Puyallup toward Highway 512's on-ramp area. A bus driver later reported seeing her around this time and informed her that bus service had concluded for the night, effectively stranding Misty without public transit options. Following the sighting near the entrance ramp area along Meridian Avenue, Misty vanished without further confirmed sightings or contact. The investigation into the disappearance was marred by delays, missteps, and a dismissive attitude from law enforcement that significantly hindered efforts to uncover the truth. Misty's mother reported her missing on September 18th after her daughter failed to return home from the fair the previous evening. Diana spent the day frantically searching for Misty, contacting friends and family, and leaving notes at Trina's house, hoping to find leads on her whereabouts. However, Diana quickly encountered obstacles with law enforcement due to jurisdictional confusion. Misty had disappeared in Puyallup, but Diana lived in Spanaway, which meant the Pierce County Sheriff's Department could not intervene without permission from the Puyallup Police Department. This delayed the filing of a formal missing person report. When Diana finally managed to file the report, she faced another setback. Police immediately classified Misty as a runaway rather than an endangered missing child. This decision was based on assumptions about Misty's behavior and Diana's credibility as a parent. Law enforcement officers scrutinized Diana's background, which included struggles with alcohol abuse and prior convictions for welfare fraud and DUI offenses. These factors led them to dismiss Diana's concerns and view Misty as a quote, throwaway girl, a term sometimes used in the early 1990s to describe teenagers presumed to have voluntarily left home for a life of partying or rebellion. The runaway theory gained traction after two of Misty's classmates falsely claimed that they had seen or spoken to her after her disappearance. One classmate alleged that Misty had called her and said she was safe, while another claimed to have seen her walking in town on September 21st. Both witnesses barely knew Misty, yet their statements were enough for police to close the case prematurely. They even went so far as to remove Misty from the National Crime Information Center database and informed the media that she had been found. A blatant falsehood. This decision effectively stalled any meaningful investigative efforts during the critical early days of her disappearance. For months, police refused to reconsider their initial assessment despite mounting evidence suggesting foul play. Diana persistently urged them to take her daughter's case seriously, but her pleas were largely ignored. It wasn't until December 1992, 3 months after Misty vanished, that investigators finally acknowledged she might have been abducted or harmed. By then, crucial leads had gone cold and potential evidence had likely been lost. When police eventually reopened the case, they interviewed two key individuals, Trina Brevard, Misty's best friend who had accompanied her to the fair, and Reuben Schmidt, an 18-year-old acquaintance who Misty had called for help on the night of her disappearance. Trina initially lied about how she returned home that evening, claiming she walked alone when she had actually received a ride from her 23-year-old boyfriend, Michael Reiner. Trina stated that Reiner had offered Misty a ride as well, but that Misty declined due to mistrust. Investigators theorized that Reiner might have returned to the fairgrounds after dropping Trina off and convinced Misty to get into his car. However, Reiner denied any involvement in the disappearance and passed a polygraph test, leading police to eliminate him as a suspect. Schmidt's account raised more questions than answers. He claimed he couldn't pick up Misty because he didn't have enough gas, but later admitted he suffered from chronic blackouts and couldn't remember his actions after speaking with her on the phone. Schmidt told investigators he woke up at his grandmother's farm near Enumclaw the morning after Misty's disappearance, but couldn't explain how he got there. His roommate contradicted Schmidt's story, stating he left their apartment shortly after speaking with Misty and didn't return until the next day. When asked if it was possible he had harmed Misty during one of his blackouts, Schmidt replied that he didn't know. By late 1992, law enforcement efforts slowed considerably as detectives struggled to piece together what happened after Misty's final phone call with Schmidt. The lack of physical evidence or eyewitness accounts left them with few leads to follow. Then an unexpected figure entered the investigation. Corey Bober, a local amateur investigator obsessed with unsolved murders in Washington state, particularly those linked to serial killers like Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer. Corey believed Misty's disappearance was connected to two earlier murders in the same area, Kimberly DeLange in 1988 and Anna Chebetnoy in 1990. Both teenagers vanished from the Hi-Ho shopping center area before their bodies were discovered in dense brush off Highway 410 in 1991. Corey urged Diana Smith to pressure police into intensifying their search for Misty and suggested organizing private search parties near the same area where the other two women were found buried less than 100 feet apart. On February 7, 1993, nearly 5 months after Misty's disappearance, a private search led by Corey uncovered several items belonging to Misty near Highway 410 and Waco Road close to Mud Mountain Dam: jeans, underwear, one sock, a hairpick, and a toothbrush. The clothing appeared weathered from prolonged exposure but showed no signs of blood or bodily fluids. Forensic analysis revealed 3 red paint chips on her jeans, which were later lost by investigators, and DNA from an unidentified male. Despite these discoveries providing potential evidence of foul play, police remained skeptical of Corey's involvement due to his eccentric behavior and strained relationship with local authorities. Investigators briefly considered him a suspect, but ultimately ruled him out due to his partial alibi for the night of Misty's disappearance. Throughout this period, Diana Smith expressed frustration with law enforcement's handling of her daughter's case. She criticized their refusal to investigate Schmidt thoroughly despite his suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements. In recent times, renewed efforts by the local police department have sought public assistance through social media campaigns aimed at generating new leads in this cold case. However, decades of mishandling by investigators have left many unanswered questions about what truly happened to Misty Copsey. Carl Landers, a 69-year-old experienced hiker from Orinda, California, vanished under mysterious circumstances on Mount Shasta on May 22, 1999. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of him has ever been found. He was well known for his physical fitness and passion for hiking and climbing, which he pursued with vigor despite his advancing age. He was a member of the Orinda Roadrunners, a local running club for older adults focused on staying active. Through this group, Carl formed close friendships with Milton Milt Gaines, 64, and Barry Gilmore, 60, who would accompany him on his ill-fated climb. Carl's hiking ambitions were fueled by a personal goal to summit the highest peak in every county in California. Mount Shasta, standing at over 14,000 feet in the Cascade Range, was one of the peaks he sought to conquer. This was not his first attempt at climbing Mount Shasta. He had previously tried but failed due to adverse conditions. That failed attempt haunted him, as Carl was known for his stubborn determination and dislike of failure. His resolve to succeed on this second attempt was evident in the meticulous planning for the trip. The climb began on Friday, May 21st, 1999. Carl and his companions planned to ascend the mountain over 2 days, starting from Bunny Flat Trailhead early in the morning and camping overnight at an area known as the 50-50 Plateau, located roughly halfway up the mountain. Their goal was to summit the peak on Saturday morning and descend by evening. Carl intended to call his wife from the town of Mount Shasta that night before embarking on additional solo hikes in the area, including Mount Eddy. His wife, Bobby Landers, had expressed concerns about him hiking alone after his companions returned home Saturday evening, but Carl reassured her that he would be fine. The trio set out early Friday morning from their motel, equipped for a challenging ascent through deep snow. Carl's pace was notably slower than that of Milt and Barry due to health issues that emerged during the hike. He began experiencing diarrhea and discomfort, likely exacerbated by altitude sickness or side effects from Diamox, a medication he was taking to help adjust to higher altitudes. Despite these challenges, he refused to quit or turn back. His companions tried walking behind him at times so as not to get too far ahead, but eventually took the lead at his insistence. By late afternoon, they reached Horse Camp but decided to push onward to 50-50 Plateau despite worsening weather conditions. Winds were at speeds estimated around 50 miles per hour as they ascended further into the mountain's exposed terrain. While setting up camp at 50-50 Plateau around 8 p.m., another hiker approached Milt and Barry asking if they knew Carl Landers. The hiker reported seeing Carl struggling down the mountain and suggested he might need assistance. Concerned for their friend's well-being, Milt and Barry descended approximately 200 yards to find Carl slowly making his way uphill. They helped him by carrying his pack and eventually brought him back to camp. At camp that evening, Milt and Barry worked together to dig out an igloo-style shelter for their tent while Carl assisted despite appearing increasingly unwell. He did not complain openly about feeling poorly but was visibly affected by his condition. When it came time for dinner, Carl stubbornly refused to eat despite encouragement from his friends. He also drank very little water despite needing hydration after several bouts of diarrhea throughout the day. This refusal to eat or drink concerned his friends but did not deter their plans to continue climbing the next day. The group decided to rest for the night before resuming their journey early Saturday morning. Although Carl seemed to sleep relatively well, getting up only once during the night to use the bathroom, his companions noted that he appeared unusually quiet when they woke up around 5:50 a.m. on May 22nd. Breakfast consisted of hot chocolate and half a bagel, which Carl managed to consume despite his weakened state. As they prepared for their journey toward Lake Helen, a higher campsite approximately 900 feet above their current location, Carl insisted on leaving camp ahead of the others so he could get a head start due to his slower pace. This decision marked the last confirmed sighting of Carl Landers. His determination and stubbornness were defining traits that shaped both his personality and approach to outdoor challenges. His friends described him as someone who could become argumentative when frustrated but would quickly regain composure. These characteristics likely contributed to his insistence on continuing despite clear signs of physical distress during this climb. After approximately an hour or two of hiking separately from Carl, Milt followed his trail toward Lake Helen but encountered a puzzling situation along the way. He saw another climber moving swiftly up the trail but quickly realized it was not Carl. Upon reaching Lake Helen, a common stopping point for climbers attempting Mount Shasta's summit, Milt found no sign of Carl anywhere in the area. Barry joined Milt at Lake Helen shortly afterward. Neither man could locate their friend despite searching nearby trails and speaking with other climbers in the area. One ranger stationed at Lake Helen reported seeing someone matching Carl's description earlier that morning but could not confirm whether it was him or another climber. Concerned about Carl's absence and lack of communication with anyone on the trail, Milt decided to descend back toward Bunny Flat later that evening to report him missing. He left behind some supplies at 50-50 Plateau in case Carl returned there after becoming disoriented or lost. On Sunday morning, May 23rd, search and rescue operations were initiated by Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department with assistance from U.S. Forest Service Rangers and volunteers equipped with skis and snowshoes. Helicopters provided by California National Guard and California Highway Patrol were deployed to scan Mount Shasta's slopes using infrared sensors capable of detecting heat signatures. Ground teams conducted grid searches across key areas where Carl might have traveled or fallen off course, including Cascade Gulch near Lake Helen, and extended their efforts into Sand Flat and McBride Springs further down the mountain slopes. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Carl's body, clothing, or equipment was ever found, leaving only theories to explain what might have happened. These theories range from natural causes and environmental factors to more speculative ideas involving foul play or even paranormal phenomena. One of the most plausible theories is that he succumbed to natural causes, such as a medical emergency or exposure to the elements. Carl was not in peak physical condition during the climb. He had been experiencing negative symptoms consistent with altitude sickness, which can include dizziness, nausea, confusion, and fatigue. He was also taking Diamox, a medication designed to help with altitude adjustment, but its side effects, such as dehydration and gastrointestinal distress, might have exacerbated his condition rather than alleviated it. Given his physical state, it is possible that Carl suffered a medical emergency, such as a heart attack or stroke, while hiking alone toward Lake Helen. His companions reported that he had refused food and water the previous evening, which could have further weakened him. If he collapsed due to a medical issue, he might have succumbed to hypothermia quickly in the cold conditions at high altitude. However, this theory does not explain why no evidence of his body or belongings was ever found during the extensive search efforts. Another plausible explanation is that Carl fell while traversing the rugged terrain. The area between 50-50 Plateau and Lake Helen is not particularly steep or hazardous compared to other parts of the mountain, but it does feature snow-covered slopes and loose volcanic rock. A misstep could have caused Carl to fall into a concealed crevasse or other natural feature where his body would be difficult to locate. However, Mount Shasta's Avalanche Gulch route, where Carl disappeared, is relatively well traveled and lacks major holes or cliffs where someone could vanish entirely. The absence of any visible signs of a fall, such as disturbed snow or scattered belongings, complicates this theory. Additionally, search and rescue teams thoroughly examined the area with helicopters, infrared sensors, and ground crews, but found no evidence of an accident. The mountain's unpredictable weather may have also played a role in the disappearance. The mountain is known for sudden changes in conditions, including high winds and snowstorms. On the night before Carl vanished, winds reportedly reached speeds of up to 50 to 70 miles per hour. Such conditions could have disoriented him or obscured his tracks in the snow. If Carl became disoriented due to weather conditions or altitude sickness, he might have wandered off the established trail into less accessible areas. This could explain why no footprints were found leading away from the main path. However, search teams expanded their efforts far beyond this area without finding any sign of him. While obviously more fantastical, Mount Shasta has long been associated with myths and legends involving paranormal phenomena. Some locals believe the mountain is home to an energy vortex or portal to another dimension. Others claim it is a hotspot for UFO activity. Numerous reports describe unidentified flying objects entering or exiting the mountain through its rocky slopes. These stories have fueled speculation that Carl may have encountered something supernatural during his hike. Such theories capture the imagination, but they lack credible evidence and are generally dismissed by experts as folklore rather than fact. Nevertheless, the location's reputation as a paranormal hotspot continues to draw attention from those who view Carl's disappearance as more than just a tragic accident. The disappearance of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, aged 9, 7, and 4 respectively, from Glenelg Beach near Adelaide, South Australia on January 26, 1966 remains one of Australia's most notorious unsolved mysteries. The siblings vanished during a routine beach outing, sparking an extensive investigation. On Wednesday, January 26, 1966, Australia Day, the city of Adelaide, South Australia, experienced scorching heat, with temperatures reaching approximately 40 degrees Celsius. The Beaumont family lived at 109 Harding Street in Somerton Park, a quiet suburb near Glenelg Beach. The family consisted of parents Grant, often referred to as Jim, and Nancy Beaumont, who had married in December 1955, and their 3 previously mentioned children. The children often visited nearby the beach, located approximately 3 kilometers from their home. It was not unusual at the time for children to travel independently to local recreational areas. On January 25th, the day before their disappearance, their father, Jim, had dropped them off at Glenelg Beach before departing on a 3-day business trip to Snowtown. On the morning of January 26th, the heat wave continued. The children asked their mother, Nancy, if they could return to the beach. Due to the extreme heat making walking uncomfortable, Nancy permitted them to take a short bus ride instead. At approximately 8:45 a.m., Nancy watched from the front gate as her 3 children boarded a public bus on Harding Street for the 5-minute journey to Glenelg Beach. Witnesses later confirmed seeing the children boarding the bus around this time. A female passenger distinctly remembered Jane holding her book and noted the children's clothing colors clearly enough to provide credible testimony. At approximately 10:10 a.m., multiple witnesses, including the bus driver, saw the siblings arriving at their destination. The next hour remains less clear. However, local postman Tom Patterson initially reported seeing the children walking along Jetty Road toward the beach during this period. Patterson knew them personally and initially claimed he saw them around mid-morning, but later expressed uncertainty about his exact timing. Between late morning and early afternoon, several credible sightings placed the children at or near Glenelg Beach. Witnesses observed them playing comfortably with an unidentified man at Collie Reserve adjacent to the beach area. This man was described consistently as approximately 6 feet, slim or athletic build, aged in his mid-30s with fair to light brown hair and a suntanned complexion. Witnesses noted that the children appeared relaxed and comfortable around him, behavior considered unusual by their parents since Jane was typically reserved around strangers. One significant witness interaction occurred when this unidentified man approached bystanders claiming money belonging to the children had gone missing from their belongings while they swam. He then left briefly to change clothes while instructing the children to wait for him. Later sightings indicated that around noon or shortly thereafter, witnesses saw this man leaving Collie Reserve accompanied by all 3 children. Another crucial sighting occurred at Wenzel's Bakery on Mosley Street near the beach. A shopkeeper familiar with the Beaumont siblings reported that Jane purchased pasties and a meat pie using a £1 note, an unusual detail since Nancy had only provided 6 shillings and 6 pence for bus fares and lunch expenses. Additionally, Jane had never previously bought a meat pie during visits there. Police later considered this evidence strongly indicative that someone else provided money to Jane. Initially expected home on either the noon or 2 p.m. bus, Nancy became increasingly concerned when her children failed to arrive as scheduled. By mid-afternoon, around 3:00 p.m., Jim returned home early from his trip due to growing concerns communicated by Nancy over telephone calls earlier that day. Upon returning home and learning his children were missing for several hours already without contact or sightings reported by neighbors or friends nearby, Jim immediately drove directly toward crowded Glenelg Beach, seeking any sign of them, but found nothing. From around 3 to 5 p.m., Jim and Nancy frantically searched streets surrounding their home neighborhood as well as friends' residences, hoping perhaps their children had stopped elsewhere unexpectedly after leaving beach areas earlier that day. When these searches yielded no results whatsoever and anxiety escalated further, they officially reported their children's disappearance to the police around approximately 5:30 p.m. Police initially assumed perhaps accidental circumstances such as drowning or becoming lost might explain why 3 young siblings remained missing beyond expected return times from local beaches frequented regularly without incident previously. However, as evening progressed without discovery, despite extensive preliminary searches, fears quickly intensified toward possible abduction scenarios involving foul play. The disappearance has led to numerous suspects being investigated over the decades. While none of these individuals have been conclusively linked to the case, their backgrounds and connections to the events of that day have kept them under scrutiny. The first suspect in the list is named Bevan Spencer von Einem, a convicted murderer serving life imprisonment for the 1984 killing of Richard Kelvin, has long been considered a suspect in the Beaumont case. Bevan was implicated in multiple murders of young boys and was believed to have accomplices. His connection to the case emerged when an informant, known only as Mr. B, alleged that Bevan had confessed to abducting 3 children from a beach years earlier. According to Mr. B, Bevan claimed he had taken the children home to perform experiments on them. He allegedly boasted about conducting brilliant surgery on each child and stated that one of them had died during the procedure. Fearing exposure, he reportedly killed the other 2 and disposed of their bodies in bushland south of Adelaide. Bevan matched descriptions of the man seen with the Beaumont children at the beach, but no concrete evidence has ever linked him to their disappearance. Another suspect was named Derek Percy, one of Australia's most notorious child killers. He was convicted for the 1969 murder of Yvonne Tuohy in Victoria. Percy was suspected in several other unsolved child murders across Australia due to his history of violent behavior and his presence in areas where such crimes occurred. Percy reportedly told investigators that he could not remember whether he had killed the Beaumont children, but admitted he was in South Australia around the time of their disappearance. However, Percy was only 17 years old in 1966, which made him younger than witnesses' descriptions of the man seen with the children. Additionally, there was no evidence that Percy had access to a vehicle at the time, which would have been necessary for transporting and disposing of 3 children. Despite these inconsistencies, some investigators continue to consider him a potential suspect. The third suspect was named James Ryan O'Neill. He was another convicted child murderer who has been linked to the Beaumont case. In 1975, O'Neill was sentenced to life imprisonment for murdering a 9-year-old boy in Tasmania. Over time, he reportedly told acquaintances that he was responsible for abducting the Beaumont children. In an interview with former detective Gordon Davey for an ABC documentary titled The Fisherman, O'Neill made ambiguous statements about his involvement. When asked directly if he murdered the Beaumont children, he replied, "On legal advice, I am not going to say where I was or when I was there." Although O'Neill denied ever visiting Adelaide, his work in the opal industry required frequent travel through Coober Pedy, which would have necessitated passing through Adelaide. Despite these claims, South Australian police interviewed O'Neill and ultimately discounted him as a suspect due to lack of evidence. Harry Phipps, a wealthy Adelaide businessman who lived just 300 meters from Glenelg Beach, became a key suspect after allegations surfaced posthumously about his abusive behavior and possible involvement in child exploitation. Harry bore a strong resemblance to witness descriptions of the man seen with the children and was known for frequently giving out £1 notes, the same denomination Jane used at Wenzel's Bakery on the day they disappeared. Harry's estranged son Hayden later claimed that he saw Jane, Arna, and Grant in his father's yard on January 26, 1966. 2 men also came forward decades later stating that Harry had paid them as teenagers to dig a large hole at his factory site shortly after the disappearance. While many suspects have emerged over nearly 6 decades since the Beaumont children's disappearance, none have been definitively proven guilty or charged with involvement in this tragic case. Each suspect brought unique circumstances or allegations that aligned partially with witness accounts or investigative theories but lacked conclusive evidence necessary for resolution. On April 3, 1943, Lansing, Illinois became the scene of a brutal murder that has remained unsolved for decades, that being the murder of 14-year-old Gloria Sullivan. Gloria's life began under deeply challenging circumstances marked by abandonment, tragedy, and instability. Born in 1929, she was the second of 3 children in her family. Her father, Clarence Sullivan, deserted his wife Viola and their children in 1933 when Gloria was just 4 years old. This act left Viola unable to provide for her children, forcing the family into dire financial straits. The situation quickly worsened when Viola passed away shortly afterward, leaving Gloria and her siblings orphaned. Following their mother's death, Gloria and her older sister Theodora were placed in a juvenile detention home due to the lack of other viable options for their care. This institutionalization was a grim chapter in their young lives, exposing them to the harsh realities of a system designed more for containment than nurturing. While Theodora eventually found a new home with a family in Chicago, Gloria's fate took a different turn. In 1935, she became the foster daughter of Patrick Brady and his wife in Lansing, Illinois. The Bradys provided Gloria with the stability and kindness she desperately needed after such a tumultuous start to life. They were described as loving and attentive caregivers who treated Gloria as their own child. Although they wished to formally adopt her, legal obstacles prevented them from doing so. Clarence Sullivan had vanished completely following his abandonment of the family, making it impossible to secure his consent for adoption. Despite this bureaucratic hurdle, the Bradys embraced Gloria fully as part of their family. Under their care, Gloria flourished emotionally and socially. She adjusted well to her new environment and began to thrive academically. Her teachers and neighbors described her as intelligent, mature beyond her years, responsible, and well-adjusted despite the hardships she had endured early on. The stability provided by the Brady household seemed to offer Gloria a chance at a brighter future. Tragedy struck again in 1941 when Mrs. Brady succumbed to cancer. At just 12 years old, Gloria faced yet another upheaval in her life. However, she responded with remarkable resilience, assuming many of the household responsibilities left behind by Mrs. Brady's passing. She effectively became the lady of the house, managing chores while continuing her education and taking on babysitting jobs in the community. Despite these additional burdens, Gloria maintained her academic success and social connections. She was well liked by peers and adults alike for her maturity and reliability. Her ability to juggle schoolwork with household duties demonstrated an extraordinary level of responsibility for someone so young. By all accounts, she had overcome the difficulties of her early childhood and was on track for a promising future. Theodora Sullivan, Gloria's older sister, who had been adopted by a family in Chicago years earlier, remained largely disconnected from Gloria's life during this period. By 1943, Theodora was working as a telephone operator in Chicago, but had not spoken to Gloria for 8 months prior to her murder. Fast forward to April 3rd, 1943, the day began as an ordinary Saturday morning for Gloria. At approximately 8 a.m., her foster father Patrick left for his job at the Inland Steel Company. Before departing, he gave Gloria money to shop for Easter clothes, a task she planned to complete with her friend Dorothy Waydig later that morning. Gloria was described as cheerful and composed during these early hours, showing no signs of distress or concern. Around 9 a.m., Gloria called Dorothy to confirm their plans for the shopping trip. Dorothy agreed to meet her at the Brady residence before heading to Hammond, Indiana. This phone call marked the beginning of what should have been a simple outing between two friends. Shortly after this conversation, a laundry delivery driver arrived at the Brady home and dropped off clothes. The driver later reported nothing unusual about the interaction with Gloria. At approximately 9:30 a.m., Viola Tobin, a neighbor of the Bradys, visited the house to retrieve a vacuum cleaner that Gloria had borrowed earlier. Tobin later recalled that Gloria appeared entirely normal during their brief interaction. She showed no signs of distress or fear and seemed ready to continue her day as planned. Tobin left shortly afterward with her vacuum cleaner, unknowingly becoming the last person, aside from her killer, to see Gloria alive. Within less than an hour of her departure, something tragic occurred inside the Brady home. While the exact time of the attack remains uncertain, investigators believe it happened sometime between 9:30 a.m. and 10:20 a.m. At approximately 10:20 a.m., Dorothy arrived at the Brady residence as planned. However, upon reaching the house, she found the front door locked from the inside. She knocked repeatedly but received no response from within. She attempted to peer through the windows but found them tightly covered by curtains, preventing her from seeing inside. Dorothy waited outside for about 5 minutes before deciding to leave. She caught the 10:30 a.m. bus to Hammond alone and continued with her shopping trip without Gloria. Later testimony from Dorothy revealed an important detail. She did not hear any radio playing during her time outside the house, a fact that would later contrast sharply with Patrick Brady's account upon his return home that evening. After Dorothy's departure, no further activity was reported at the residence until Patrick returned home from work at approximately 5:15 p.m. When Patrick arrived home, he immediately noticed something unusual. Loud music was playing from inside the house. This detail stood out because Dorothy had explicitly stated there was no radio noise when she visited earlier in the day. The discrepancy suggested that someone, likely Gloria's killer, had turned on the radio after Dorothy left. Patrick entered through an unlocked front door and made his way into the kitchen, where he discovered a horrifying scene. Gloria lay dead on the floor, her body ravaged by multiple stab wounds. She had been stabbed 20 times in her chest, back, and throat with knives taken directly from their kitchen. Defensive wounds on her arms indicated she had fought desperately against her attacker. The brutality of the crime shocked investigators and residents alike. Despite extensive efforts to reconstruct Gloria's final hours and identify her killer, many aspects of this timeline remain shrouded in mystery. The initial investigation revealed several puzzling clues at the crime scene. Despite the ferocity of the attack, there were no signs of sexual assault or robbery. Gloria was fully dressed and nothing appeared to be missing from the house. A sum of $200 in cash remained untouched in a kitchen cabinet, which further ruled out theft as a motive. The house itself was in its usual state of order, with no signs of forced entry or disruption beyond what occurred during the struggle. In the bathroom adjacent to the kitchen, investigators discovered critical forensic evidence that suggested additional activity by the killer after the murder. A bloody palm print was found on the wash basin along with a bloody fingerprint on the wall. Nearby was a stack of bloody towels, indicating that the perpetrator had taken time to clean themselves before leaving. This detail suggested that the killer was concerned about their appearance and wanted to avoid drawing attention while fleeing. One of the most intriguing discoveries was Gloria's hairbrush in the bathroom. The brush contained strands of long blonde hair, distinctly different from Gloria's brunette hair or Patrick's gray hair. This clue raised speculation that another individual, possibly female, had been present in the house around the time of her murder. However, it also led to conflicting interpretations. Some theorized that these hairs might have belonged to one of Gloria's friends who had visited previously and casually used her brush, which would not be unusual. The killer's actions at the crime scene added layers of complexity to an already baffling case. The decision to clean up using towels and leave behind bloody fingerprints and palm prints suggested either carelessness or haste in escaping after committing such a violent act. Additionally, turning up the radio volume could indicate an attempt to obscure sounds during or after the attack, or simply create confusion about timing. The lack of any clear motive further complicated efforts to understand what drove someone to commit such an act against a seemingly well-adjusted and innocent young girl. Investigators were left grappling with questions about whether this crime was premeditated or impulsive and whether it involved personal animosity or random violence. One of the earliest theories involved Clarence Sullivan, Gloria's biological father, who had abandoned his family in 1933 when she was just 4 years old. Despite his long absence from Gloria's life, vague reports suggested that he might have been seen in Lansing around the time of the murder. Police considered whether Clarence could have returned after 10 years for reasons unknown and committed this heinous act against his daughter. However, this theory raised more questions than it answered. Why would Clarence suddenly reappear after so long? What motive could he possibly have for murdering his own child? Efforts to locate him proved fruitless. Clarence had effectively vanished without a trace and was declared legally dead in 1950. Another lead emerged from entries in Gloria's diary mentioning an unnamed male acquaintance who had recently, quote, tried to flirt with her. Investigators identified this individual and questioned him thoroughly about his interactions with the victim. However, he was ultimately cleared as a suspect due to lack of evidence linking him to the crime. This lead added an element of intrigue to the case but did little to advance it. While it suggested that someone might have taken an inappropriate interest in Gloria, there was no indication that this person harbored violent intentions or had any connection to her murder. Over time, other theories about potential suspects emerged but remained speculative due to lack of evidence. One possibility involved an unknown magazine salesman rumored locally at the time. Some speculated that this individual might have entered homes under false pretenses and targeted Gloria for reasons unknown. However, investigators found no concrete evidence supporting this theory. Gloria's older sister, Theodora, also struggled to come to terms with her sister's death. When questioned by police during the investigation, she was unable to provide any useful information about potential suspects or motives for the crime. She had no knowledge of their father Clarence's whereabouts or whether he might have been involved in the murder. The estrangement between Theodora and Gloria added another layer of tragedy to the case. Not only did Theodora lose her sister under horrific circumstances, but she also carried the burden of not having been closer to her during her final years. As for Gloria's father Patrick, his health began to deteriorate under the weight of his sorrow. 4 years after Gloria's murder in 1947, he passed away from a heart attack at the age of 59. Many who knew him believed that his grief over Gloria's death contributed significantly to his early demise. In the years following his daughter's death, Patrick became consumed by grief and a relentless desire for justice. He frequently visited the police station, hoping for any new developments in the investigation. Despite his persistence, no significant leads ever emerged to solve the case. Born in the early 1930s, Jack Robinson grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. He was a military veteran, civil servant, and devoted father. Over the course of his 65 years, Jack earned the respect of those around him through his commitment to helping others and his steadfast character. His life of service began with his enlistment in the United States Air Force, where he served for 25 years, including a tour in Vietnam. His military career instilled discipline and a sense of purpose that he carried into his civilian life after retiring from active duty. Upon leaving the military, Jack transitioned into civil service, working at Moncrief Army Health Clinic in Columbia's Fort Jackson for another 20 years. His colleagues at Moncrief remembered him as a dedicated worker who took pride in his role within the community. Outside of work, Jack devoted much of his time to volunteering at homeless shelters and soup kitchens throughout Columbia. His efforts to help those in need showcased his generosity and kindness. He was also involved in local politics, working with the Democratic Party to support initiatives aimed at improving the lives of residents in his community. Jack's volunteer work often brought him into contact with people from all walks of life, earning him a reputation as someone who genuinely cared about others. Many believe that this aspect of his life may have played a role in the events leading up to his tragic death. Additionally, Jack was deeply committed to his family, particularly his daughter Tammy Downs and her two sons Doug and Matthew. Tammy was Jack's only child, and their bond remained strong throughout his life. Tammy recalls her father as a loving parent who valued spending time with her and her children. Both of Jack's grandsons have fond memories of their grandfather, describing him as a quiet but caring presence in their lives. Jack lived alone in the Wellesley Place apartments on Ranch Road in Columbia's Sandwood neighborhood during the final years of his life. While he preferred solitude at home, he maintained close relationships with his family and a small circle of friends. Those who knew Jack described him as an introverted yet kind-hearted man who found joy in simple pleasures. He had a passion for trains and enjoyed learning about their history and mechanics. Fast forward to August 17, 1996, Jack left his apartment and drove to the Rosewood Boat Landing. This location, along the Congaree River at the far west end of Rosewood Drive, was a quiet and somewhat secluded area frequented by locals for relaxation and picnics. Jack's decision to visit this isolated spot that evening remains one of the enduring mysteries of the case. He did not own a boat or have any known connections to the area, leaving investigators puzzled about what brought him there. At approximately 6 p.m., witnesses at the scene observed Jack arriving in his white 1991 Dodge Dynasty. Shortly after parking, he was seen meeting with a younger Hispanic man. The two appeared to be acquaintances or perhaps even friends based on their interactions. They walked together from the parking lot into a wooded clearing near the boat ramp. Witnesses later reported that their conversation seemed calm at first but quickly escalated into an argument. As the two men disappeared from sight into the woods, witnesses overheard bits of their heated exchange. Jack was heard shouting phrases such as, "What is it that you want?" and offering money to his companion. His tone suggested desperation or frustration, as if he were trying to placate the man or resolve some personal dispute. Moments later, a loud scream pierced the air, signaling that something had gone terribly wrong. The witnesses saw the younger man fleeing on foot from the wooded area while Jack stumbled out shortly afterward, clutching his stomach and chest. He had sustained multiple stab wounds and was bleeding profusely. Jack managed to make his way toward the witnesses, pleading for help before collapsing on the ground. His injuries included 3 deep stab wounds to his abdomen and 1 cut to his face, as well as defensive cuts on his hands, indicating that he had fought back against his attacker. Emergency services were called immediately and paramedics rushed Jack to Palmetto Health Richland Hospital. Despite their efforts to save him, his injuries proved fatal. Within 3 hours of being attacked, he succumbed to a perforated liver caused by one of the stab wounds and significant blood loss. The witnesses described the suspect to police as a Hispanic male with an olive complexion, aged between 25 and 35 years old at the time of the murder. He was approximately 5'5" to 5'10" inches tall, weighed between 150 to 180 pounds, had black hair and a mustache, and was wearing aviator-style sunglasses. Witnesses also reported overhearing fragments of Jack's argument with the suspect before the altercation turned violent. Jack was heard offering money to his assailant and shouting phrases such as, "What is it that you want?" These statements suggested that money might have been a factor in the confrontation, though investigators later questioned whether it was truly the motive for the attack. The crime scene presented challenges for investigators due to its outdoor location and lack of physical evidence directly linking anyone to the murder. A rusty hunting knife was found near the area during a subsequent search, but forensic testing revealed that it was not connected to Jack's stabbing. Environmental degradation had rendered any potential DNA evidence on the knife unusable. Law enforcement initially focused on establishing whether Jack had planned to meet someone at Rosewood Boat Landing or if his encounter with the suspect was purely coincidental. Investigators scoured Jack's phone records and financial statements but found no indications that he had made arrangements for a meeting or transaction at this location. His daughter Tammy confirmed that her father was not known to frequent this area and had no apparent reason for being there. This lack of premeditated plans led investigators to consider 2 possibilities. Either Jack had been lured there under false pretenses or he had encountered someone he knew casually by chance. Witnesses believed that Jack and the suspect were acquaintances based on their interactions before entering the wooded area. About a year after Jack's murder, investigators explored potential connections between his case and another double homicide involving Kimberly Brown, a former colleague of Jack, and her 3-year-old niece Leah Brazil. Their bodies were discovered near another boat ramp off Highway 601 in South Carolina. Bloodhounds used during Jack's investigation tracked a scent from Rosewood Boat Landing to a business later associated with Max Noten, who confessed to Kimberly's murder. Initially, detectives believed Max might also be responsible for Jack's death due to circumstantial evidence linking him to both locations. However, significant discrepancies emerged, such as the fact that Max was African American while the suspect in Jack's case was described as Hispanic. Furthermore, Kimberly's body was dumped post-mortem while Jack was killed on site and left at the scene. Ultimately, prosecutors did not pursue charges against Max for Jack's murder due to insufficient evidence. They informed Jack's family that while they believed Max might be involved, they could not proceed without physical evidence tying him directly to the crime. While theories are rampant, from personal vendettas to chance encounters, the truth remains elusive after about 3 decades. The Florence Salon murders, a brutal triple homicide that occurred on November 6, 2001 in the small town of Florence, Montana, remain one of the most perplexing and chilling unsolved cases in the state's history. The victims, Dorothy Harris, Brenda Patch, and Cynthia Paulus, were found murdered inside the Hair Gallery, a small salon located along Highway 93. Despite decades of investigation, the case remains unresolved. On that fateful Tuesday morning, a customer arrived at the Hair Gallery for her scheduled manicure appointment. As she parked her car, she noticed a man walking away from the salon. Witnesses later described this man as thin and unusually dressed, wearing a long dark trench coat or duster jacket and a wide-brimmed black hat resembling either a fedora or a top hat. His strange appearance caught the attention of several people in the area, but no one could have anticipated the horror awaiting inside the salon. The customer entered through the back door, a common practice for patrons of the business, and was immediately confronted with a grisly scene. Lying face down in a pool of blood near the entryway was Dorothy Harris, the salon's owner. Her body was curled into a fetal position, and her throat had been deeply slashed. Horrified but determined to call for help, the customer stepped over her body to reach the nearby telephone and dialed authorities. She then retreated from the building to wait for them to arrive. When law enforcement officers entered the salon to investigate further, they discovered 2 more bodies in a small utility room at the back of the establishment. These victims were identified as Brenda Patch, a manicurist employed at the hair gallery, and Cynthia Paulus, a regular customer who had come in for her weekly manicure. Like Harris, both women had suffered fatal injuries to their throats, with deep incisions that left investigators stunned by the sheer violence of the attack. Investigators pieced together a tentative timeline based on witness accounts and evidence at the scene. It is believed that Brenda and Cynthia were alone in the salon when the attacker arrived. The assailant likely forced them into the cramped utility room where they were made to kneel before being killed. The room itself bore signs of struggle. Police later described it as a battle scene, with blood spattered across its walls. Minutes after Brenda and Cynthia were murdered, Dorothy returned to the salon. She had visited a nearby bank earlier that morning to make her routine deposit and likely entered through the back door upon her return. Tragically, she encountered the killer almost immediately upon entering and was murdered in the doorway. Her injuries mirrored those of Brenda and Cynthia, but investigators noted additional undisclosed injuries on all 3 victims. Importantly, there was no evidence of sexual assault on any of the victims, a detail that ruled out certain motives but deepened the mystery surrounding this violent act. One of the most baffling aspects of this case is its apparent lack of motive. Nothing valuable appeared to have been stolen from the business. Only 2 inexpensive plastic hairdressing capes were reported missing. This absence of theft or assault left detectives struggling to understand why someone would commit such an extraordinarily violent crime against 3 seemingly ordinary women. As for that previously mentioned man in the long coat, 7 witnesses reported seeing him loitering around Highway 93 near the hair gallery in the hours leading up to and immediately following the murders. Some described him as walking calmly away from the salon after the killings, while others noted that he appeared to be wandering aimlessly in nearby areas. One witness specifically saw him heading toward the woods after leaving the vicinity of the salon. Despite his conspicuous appearance and behavior, authorities were never able to identify him or determine his role in the crime. The sequence of events leading up to the murders is tightly constrained by time. Dorothy had been seen at a nearby bank at approximately 10:30 a.m. It typically took her around 20 minutes to drive back to the hair gallery, placing her arrival at roughly 10:50 a.m. Investigators theorized that Brenda and Cynthia were already inside when Dorothy returned to the salon. Brenda had opened the hair gallery earlier that morning and was giving Cynthia her manicure appointment when the killer entered. The chain of events means that all 3 women were killed within a window of approximately 20 to 30 minutes, as the bodies were discovered around 11 a.m. Investigators recovered several pieces of evidence from the business that could potentially identify the perpetrator. Among these were an unidentified palm print found inside the salon and a pair of dark sunglasses that did not belong to any of the victims. These items were carefully analyzed but ultimately failed to provide conclusive leads. As weeks turned into months without significant progress, investigators began exploring theories involving drug-related motives. By 2005, attention turned to Brian Weber and Lincoln Benavides, 2 men with extensive criminal histories tied to substance trafficking in western Montana. Brian was a small-time dealer with a history of violent crimes, while Lincoln was alleged to be the leader of a meth ring operating across Montana and Idaho. Prosecutors hypothesized that Lincoln had ordered Brian to carry out the murders as part of a substance-related retaliation against someone connected to one of the victims. Court documents suggested that an unpaid debt may have been at the center of this theory. Some investigators believe that one of the women or someone close to them had run afoul of Lincoln by mishandling or owing money tied to his operations. Brian's DNA was also found inside the hair gallery, which raised suspicions about his involvement. When questioned by authorities about why his DNA was present at the crime scene, Brian claimed he had not been inside the building since it had operated as a post office years earlier, a statement investigators found dubious. Brian also allowed police to search his van, but maintained his innocence regarding any involvement in the murders. Despite these leads, evidence linking Brian and Lincoln directly to the murders remained circumstantial at best. Much of the prosecution's case relied on testimony from prison informants who claimed that Brian had confessed to his involvement while incarcerated. However, these statements were deemed unreliable under scrutiny, as informants often provide information in exchange for reduced sentences or other benefits. In 2008, both men were charged with multiple counts related to murder while engaged in substance trafficking. Prosecutors argued that Lincoln orchestrated the killings and that Brian acted as his enforcer. If convicted, both men faced potential sentences of death or life imprisonment. However, federal prosecutors ultimately dropped all charges against Brian and Lincoln due to insufficient evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Lincoln later accepted a plea deal on unrelated federal charges and is currently serving a 25-year sentence set to end in 2030. Similarly, Brian remains incarcerated for separate methamphetamine convictions and is scheduled for release in 2029. While some investigators supported the theory that illegal substances played a role in motivating the murders, others believed that one of the three women may have been specifically targeted for unrelated reasons. This line of thinking stemmed from behavioral profiling and analysis of how events unfolded at the salon. Cynthia's presence at the salon on November 6th was unusual. She typically scheduled her appointments for Friday mornings, but had rescheduled for that Tuesday morning due to an event she planned to attend later that evening. Some investigators speculated that her unexpected appearance might have disrupted plans, targeting another individual, or made her an unintended victim. Others theorized that Dorothy's role as a business owner might have made her more visible within the small community and therefore more likely to attract unwanted attention. However, her routine bank visit earlier that morning suggested she was not present when Brenda and Cynthia were initially attacked in the utility room at the back of the salon. This timeline made it less likely that Dorothy was the intended target unless her arrival coincided with an opportunistic moment for the killer. Brenda's connection to local residents through her work as a manicurist also raised questions about whether she might have been targeted due to personal disputes or associations unknown to investigators. However, no concrete evidence emerged linking Brenda or any other victim to conflicts significant enough to warrant such extreme violence. Despite decades of investigation, this case remains unsolved more than 20 years later. Amy Lynn Bradley was born on May 12, 1974 in Petersburg, Virginia, and grew up in Chesterfield County with her parents, Ron and Iva Bradley, and her younger brother, Brad. From an early age, Amy demonstrated a vibrant personality and a strong sense of compassion. Her family and friends described her as outgoing, confident, and someone who always made people feel included. She was particularly known for her kindness, such as inviting strangers to join her family at dinner or befriending individuals with disabilities at her local karaoke club. These qualities made Amy a beloved figure among those who knew her. Her athleticism was another defining feature of her life. In high school, she excelled in sports, lettering in 5 varsity teams alongside her brother. Basketball was her favorite sport, and she earned a scholarship to attend Longwood University in Virginia. At Longwood, Amy continued to shine both academically and athletically. She played on the basketball team, joined the swim team as an assistant captain, and worked toward a degree in physical education. Her strong swimming abilities also led her to work as a lifeguard, a skill that would later be highlighted in discussions about her disappearance. In 1996, she graduated from Longwood University with plans for a bright future. Her parents gifted her an English bulldog named Bailey as a graduation present, which she adored. Amy moved into an apartment in Chesterfield shortly after graduation and began working at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse while preparing for the next chapter of her life. She had big dreams, pursuing a master's degree in sports psychology. She was also excited about starting a full-time marketing assistant position at her aunt's computer consulting firm. By 1998, Amy was thriving personally and professionally. She had concert tickets lined up for when she returned from vacation, had adopted another bulldog named Daisy to accompany Bailey, and had even bought gifts for friends during the trip. Her brother Brad recalled that this period was one of the happiest times of Amy's life. She was excited about the future and eagerly preparing for new opportunities. The Bradley family's ill-fated Caribbean cruise began as a celebration of Ron Bradley's achievement at work. He had won an annual sales contest through his employer, Illinois Mutual Life Insurance Company, which included an all-expenses-paid week-long cruise aboard Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas. Ron and his wife decided to extend the celebration by inviting their children to join them on the trip, covering their airfare and cruise tickets. The cruise itinerary included stops in San Juan, Aruba, Curacao, St. Martin, St. Thomas, and finally returning to Puerto Rico. The family boarded the ship on March 21st, 1998, expecting a relaxing vacation filled with sightseeing and quality time together. Initially hesitant about the trip due to her unease with open water, despite being a strong swimmer, Amy eventually agreed to join her family after some encouragement. As the departure date approached, her apprehension turned into excitement. She dyed her hair from bleach blonde to brown, got her nails done, and spent 3 weeks tanning in preparation for the cruise. On March 21st, Amy and Brad flew from Richmond International Airport to San Juan via Miami while their parents took an earlier flight. Upon arriving in San Juan, the siblings met up with their parents before boarding Rhapsody of the Seas. Amy wrote postcards to friends back home expressing excitement about the trip and purchased rolls of film for a photo contest she planned to enter upon returning home. The ship itself was capable of holding well over 2,000 passengers and 765 crew members across 11 decks. Weighing 75,000 tons and stretching nearly 1,000 feet long with over 100 feet in width, it offered amenities such as pools, nightclubs, restaurants, casinos, and more. The first few days of the cruise were filled with relaxation and fun for the Bradleys. They explored Aruba on March 23rd by renting a jeep to tour the island before returning to the ship for dinner dressed in formal attire. That evening marked one of the last times they were all together as a family before tragedy struck. After dinner on March 23rd, Amy and Brad decided to visit the ship's casino before heading to its nightclub, the Viking Lounge, for Mardi Gras-themed festivities hosted by Blue Orchid, the ship's band. A videographer named Chris Fenwick captured footage of Amy dancing with Alistair Yellow Douglas, the band's bass player, during this event. Amy interacted extensively with Yellow throughout the night, but reportedly found him unpleasant. She told Brad he was, quote, a real jerk. Witnesses later claimed Yellow had been flirting persistently with Amy during their interactions. Brad eventually returned to their cabin around 3:35 a.m., followed by Amy 5 minutes later, according to electronic door lock records. The siblings smoked cigarettes together on their balcony while chatting about plans for Curacao before Brad went to bed around 3:50 a.m., leaving Amy outside for fresh air due to mild motion sickness. At approximately 5:30 a.m., Ron woke up briefly and saw Amy asleep on the balcony lounge chair before returning to bed himself. When he woke again around 6, he found that she was gone. The balcony door was partially open but empty except for her shirt left behind on a chair inside the room. Her cigarettes and lighter were missing. However, all of her shoes remained in the cabin, a detail indicating she had left barefoot. Alarmed but hopeful that his daughter might be taking pictures or enjoying fresh air elsewhere on deck given the docking procedures underway at that time, Ron began searching for Amy across common areas on board but found no trace of her. He woke his family at around 6:30 to assist in the search. Afterward, they alerted the crew and requested an announcement over the ship's intercom system to prevent passengers from disembarking at their next stop. Unfortunately, staff delayed making an announcement until 7:50 a.m., by which time many passengers had already left the ship. The announcement itself was brief and vague. It said something to the extent of, "Will Amy Bradley please come to the purser's desk?" This delay significantly reduced the chances of locating Amy quickly and raised questions about whether proper protocols were followed. Between 12:15 p.m. and 1 p.m., cruise staff conducted a search of all the decks, including all rooms aboard Rhapsody of the Seas. Despite combing through every area accessible to passengers and crew, they found no trace of Amy. The Bradleys were devastated by what they perceived as a lack of urgency and cooperation from Royal Caribbean staff during these critical early hours. Following Amy's disappearance, authorities launched extensive search operations both at sea and on land in Curacao. The Dutch Caribbean Coast Guard conducted a 4-day aerial and sea search that ended on March 27, 1998. This operation involved 3 helicopters and a radar-equipped plane scanning surrounding waters for any sign of Amy or evidence suggesting she had fallen overboard. Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines also chartered additional boats to assist in these efforts. Despite these exhaustive measures, no evidence of Amy's whereabouts was found in the ocean or along nearby coastlines. Authorities initially speculated that she might have fallen overboard or jumped intentionally, a theory her family vehemently disputed due to her strong swimming skills, excitement about future plans, and lack of any prior indication of suicidal tendencies. The Bradleys believed that if Amy had left the ship voluntarily or been abducted, she might still be somewhere in Curacao. However, searches on land faced significant obstacles due to limited jurisdictional authority for US-based investigators like the FBI. Local police in Curacao were involved but lacked leads or evidence pointing toward Amy's presence on shore. Witness reports from Curacao later emerged suggesting possible sightings of Amy shortly after her disappearance. A taxi driver claimed he saw a woman matching her description frantically searching for a phone near the port on March 24th. The same day, passengers disembarked from Rhapsody of the Seas. However, this account could not be verified, and subsequent searches yielded no further clues. Frustrated by what they perceived as insufficient action from Royal Caribbean and local authorities, the Bradley family took matters into their own hands. They distributed flyers with Amy's photograph across Curacao and neighboring islands, while offering substantial rewards for information leading to her recovery. Their efforts garnered widespread attention but failed to produce actionable leads. The family also criticized Royal Caribbean for prioritizing its reputation over finding their daughter. They believed that delays in announcing Amy's disappearance and allowing passengers to disembark without thorough checks were motivated by concerns about negative publicity rather than genuine concern for her safety. One of the most widely accepted theories is that Amy was abducted and sold into human trafficking. This theory is supported by multiple witness accounts and circumstantial evidence that emerged in the years following her disappearance. Shortly after Amy vanished, her family received reports of possible sightings in Curacao. In August 1998, 5 months after she disappeared, 2 Canadian tourists claimed to have seen a woman resembling Amy on a beach in the same area. The woman reportedly had tattoos identical to Amy's, specifically a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball on her shoulder and a lizard on her navel. The tourists did not realize she was a missing person until they saw her case on television later. In January 1999, a U.S. Navy petty officer reported seeing a woman in a brothel in Curacao who identified herself as Amy Lynn Bradley. According to the officer, the woman begged for help and explained that she was being held against her will. However, he did not report the incident at the time due to fears about his career being jeopardized for visiting a brothel. He only contacted Amy's family after retiring from the Navy and seeing her photo in a magazine. Years later, in 2005, Amy's parents received an email containing photographs of a sex worker known as Jazz who bore a striking resemblance to Amy. Experts noted that the woman appeared distressed and withdrawn. The photos were discovered by an organization that monitors adult websites for victims of trafficking. Although the images provided hope that Amy might still be alive, investigators were unable to trace their origin or confirm whether they depicted her. Another sighting occurred in Barbados when Judy Maurer claimed she saw Amy in a department store restroom in 2005. Maurer reported that Amy was accompanied by 3 men who threatened her before leaving the restroom. After they left, Maurer approached the woman, who identified herself as Amy from Virginia. However, before Maurer could help further, the men returned and forcibly removed Amy from the store. These accounts paint a chilling picture of what might have happened to Amy after she disappeared. Her family believes she was targeted because of her appearance and outgoing personality, qualities that might make her a quote trophy in human trafficking circles. Despite these credible sightings, no concrete evidence has ever been found to confirm this theory. Another theory suggests that Amy may have been harmed by someone aboard Rhapsody of the Seas. Suspicious behavior by crew members and passengers has fueled speculation about foul play. Alistair "Yellow" Douglas, the bass player from the ship's band who danced with Amy at the nightclub on March 23rd, has been scrutinized for his actions before and after her disappearance. Witnesses claimed they saw Douglas with Amy on the upper deck between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., handing her a drink before they entered an elevator together. Douglas was later seen alone on deck after Amy went missing, raising questions about his involvement. Adding to suspicions is Douglas's alleged comment to Brad Bradley, the victim's brother, later that day. According to Brad, Douglas expressed regret about what had happened to his sister before news of her disappearance had been made public aboard the ship. This peculiar statement has led many to believe Douglas knew more than he admitted. Another crew member, a waiter, had reportedly shown unusual interest in Amy during the trip. He persistently invited her to go ashore with him at Curaçao despite her refusals. This behavior raised concerns about whether he might have played a role in her disappearance. Further complicating matters are missing photographs from the ship's gallery. Professional photographers aboard cruise ships often display pictures taken during events for passengers to purchase. However, none of Amy's photos could be found after she disappeared. Her family suspects someone intentionally removed them to erase evidence of her presence or interactions with others on board. Some theorists speculate that if foul play occurred on board, Amy may have been murdered and thrown overboard to conceal the crime. However, no physical evidence such as blood or DNA has ever been recovered from Rhapsody of the Seas to support this theory. Initially, authorities proposed that Amy may have fallen overboard accidentally or died by suicide, a theory dismissed by both investigators and her family due to lack of supporting evidence. Amy was known for her strong swimming skills and had no history of mental health issues or suicidal tendencies. She was excited about returning home to start a new job, move into her apartment, and care for her bulldog Daisy, all signs pointing toward future plans rather than despair. The possibility of an accidental fall has also been questioned due to logistical inconsistencies. If Amy fell overboard from her cabin balcony or another part of the ship, it is unlikely she would have gone unnoticed given how quickly Ron Bradley began searching for her after discovering she was missing at 6 a.m. Furthermore, extensive searches conducted by the Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard yielded no trace of her body in surrounding waters. Some theorists suggest that alcohol consumption during the party may have impaired Amy's judgment or coordination, leading to an accidental fall while leaning over railings or navigating decks late at night. However, this theory remains speculative without evidence confirming such an event occurred. Ray Gricar was born on October 9, 1945 in Cleveland, Ohio, and grew up in the city's Collinwood neighborhood. He attended high school at Gilmore Academy, a prestigious Catholic institution in Gates Mills, Ohio. From an early age, Ray displayed a strong intellect and a disciplined work ethic. After graduating from high school, he enrolled at the University of Dayton, where he developed an interest in law while working as an intern for the prosecutor's office. This experience cemented his decision to pursue a legal career, and after earning his undergraduate degree, he returned to Cleveland to study law at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. He obtained his Juris Doctor and soon embarked on his legal career. Ray began his professional journey as a prosecutor in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, where he specialized in prosecuting cases involving rape and murder. Defense attorneys prepared their clients for intense cross-examinations when facing Ray in court. His ability to craft succinct arguments and his unwavering focus on justice distinguished him as a formidable figure in the legal community. Among the notable cases he handled during this time was the prosecution of several high-profile murder cases that showcased his ability to piece together complex evidence and secure convictions. In 1979, Ray's life took a significant turn when his first wife, Barbara Gray, was hired as a professor at Pennsylvania State University. The couple relocated to State College, Pennsylvania, along with their adopted daughter, Laura. During this period, Ray chose to step away from his legal career temporarily to become a stay-at-home father for his child. This decision reflected his deep commitment to family and his belief in prioritizing personal responsibilities over professional ambitions. After spending more than a year as a stay-at-home dad, Ray returned to the legal field when Centre County District Attorney David Grine offered him an assistant position. Ray accepted the role and quickly made an impression with his dedication and skill. In 1985, when incumbent District Attorney Robert Mix decided not to run for re-election, Ray seized the opportunity to campaign for the position. Running against Amos Goodall, a fellow attorney who had become a close friend, Ray won the election by a narrow margin of 600 votes. Upon taking office as Centre County's district attorney, Ray faced unique challenges. At the time, the position was part-time, but he successfully campaigned to make it full-time by 1996. His tenure as district attorney spanned 2 decades, during which he was re-elected 4 times, solidifying his status as a trusted public servant in the community. Ray's career was marked by several high-profile cases that demonstrated his commitment to justice and his ability to navigate complex legal scenarios. One such case involved the 1993 murder of Dawn Marie Birnbaum, a 17-year-old runaway whose body was discovered in a snowbank off Interstate 80. Using circumstantial evidence such as DNA analysis, tire tracks, and gas receipts, Ray successfully linked the crime to a cross-country truck driver who had dumped Birnbaum's body in Centre County, a critical mistake that allowed Ray jurisdiction over the case. Despite the challenges posed by relying heavily on circumstantial evidence, Ray's attention to detail ensured that justice was served. Perhaps one of the most controversial decisions of his career came in 1998 when he declined to prosecute Penn State assistant football coach Jerry Sandusky following allegations of child sexual abuse. The allegations involved Jerry showering with an 11-year-old boy and engaging in inappropriate conduct, a claim supported by witness testimony from law enforcement officers who overheard Sandusky admitting to showering with young boys. Despite this evidence and pressure from some quarters to pursue charges against Jerry, Ray ultimately decided not to proceed with criminal charges. While some speculated that this decision was influenced by Jerry's status as a hometown icon or political considerations tied to Penn State's influence in Centre County, those close to Ray refuted such claims. They described him as fiercely independent and unbowed by external pressures or public opinion. Anthony DeBoeuf, who worked under Ray as an assistant district attorney for 5 years, emphasized that, quote, no one got a bye with Ray. He insisted that the decision not to prosecute Jerry stemmed from insufficient evidence rather than favoritism or reluctance to challenge powerful figures. Similarly, Robert Buhner Jr., Montour County's district attorney and one of Ray's closest friends, defended this choice by noting that Ray would never pursue charges unless he believed there was a reasonable likelihood of conviction. Despite these assurances from colleagues and friends about his integrity and independence as a prosecutor, Jerry's eventual conviction on multiple counts of sexual abuse in 2011 reignited scrutiny over Ray's handling of the initial allegations. This controversy added another layer of complexity to discussions about his legacy following his disappearance. On the morning of April 15, 2005, Ray decided to take a day off from work as Centre County's district attorney. He informed his girlfriend, Patty Fornicola, that he planned to enjoy the warm spring weather by taking a drive through Brush Valley along Route 192. Around 11:30 a.m., Ray called Patty on his cell phone to let her know he was driving east-northeast toward Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, a town roughly 45 miles from his home in Bellefonte. During the call, he sounded calm and cheerful, ending the conversation with, "I love you." This was the last confirmed interaction anyone had with him. Patty returned home after work and noticed Ray wasn't back yet. Initially unconcerned, she went to the gym but began to worry when she returned home later that evening and still found no sign of him. After several hours of unanswered phone calls, his cell phone went straight to voicemail. Patty contacted authorities at approximately 11:30 p.m. to report him missing. She described his behavior as highly unusual and emphasized that Ray was not someone who would disappear without notifying her. The following day, investigators located Ray's distinctive red Mini Cooper parked in a dirt lot near the Street of Shops Antique Mall in Lewisburg. The vehicle was locked and inside were puzzling clues. Ray's cell phone was found turned off and locked in the car, along with a water bottle bearing his DNA. However, his wallet, car keys, laptop computer, and sunglasses were missing. Forensic technicians noted cigarette ashes on the passenger side floor mat and detected a strong smell of tobacco inside the car, details that raised suspicions because Ray was a staunch non-smoker who disliked cigarette smoke. Investigators also found cigarette butts on the ground near the car, but were unable to extract any useful DNA evidence from them. Witness accounts added further intrigue to the case. Several individuals reported seeing Ray at the antique mall earlier that day, including one witness who claimed he appeared to be waiting for someone. The proprietor of the mall recalled seeing a man matching Ray's description browsing through antiques, a pastime he enjoyed, but this sighting could not be definitively confirmed. Authorities launched an extensive search for Ray in the days following his disappearance. The proximity of his vehicle to two bridges over the Susquehanna River prompted searches of the water and surrounding banks. Dive teams scoured the riverbed under favorable conditions. Visibility was clear enough to see straight to the bottom of the river, which consisted mostly of flat rock surfaces. Despite these efforts, no trace of Ray or evidence suggesting foul play was discovered. The most perplexing piece of evidence in Ray's case surfaced months after his disappearance when fishermen discovered his county-issued laptop submerged in the Susquehanna River beneath a bridge between Lewisburg and Milton. The discovery occurred on July 30th, 2005, and was made several hundred yards from where his car had been found. The laptop had become lodged against a bridge support, but was missing its hard drive. 2 months later, in October 2005, another significant discovery was made. A hard drive was found on the riverbank approximately 100 yards from where the laptop had been recovered. Investigators believed it likely belonged to Ray's laptop. However, it was severely damaged due to prolonged exposure to water and environmental conditions. Forensic experts, including specialists from the FBI, U.S. Secret Service, and a data recovery firm named Kroll OnTrack, were unable to retrieve any information from it. The sand and grit in the river had rendered it irreparably damaged. The condition of both the laptop and hard drive raised critical questions about their disposal. Investigators hypothesized that someone had intentionally removed the hard drive before discarding both items into the river. This theory suggested premeditation, but offered no clues as to who might have done it or why. Adding another layer of mystery were internet searches conducted on Ray's home computer prior to his disappearance. In April 2009, 4 years after he went missing, police revealed that someone had searched phrases like "how to wreck a hard drive," "how to fry a hard drive," and "water damage to a notebook computer" on his home computer before April 15, 2005. These searches strongly indicated that someone had been researching methods for destroying digital evidence. It remains unclear whether Ray himself conducted these searches or if someone else accessed his computer with malicious intent. If Ray performed these searches, it could suggest he intended to erase sensitive information from his laptop before disappearing voluntarily or under duress. Conversely, if another individual conducted these searches, it could point toward foul play involving someone who wanted to ensure that no incriminating data could be recovered from Ray's laptop. In addition to his laptop and its hard drive, several other personal items were unaccounted for following the disappearance. Ray's wallet and car keys were never located despite extensive searches of the area surrounding Lewisburg and along the Susquehanna River. Notably absent from his home were his sunglasses, an item he typically carried with him, which led investigators to believe he took them when he left Bellefonte on April 15th. One of the most widely discussed theories is that Ray ended his own life. This idea gained traction early in the investigation due to eerie parallels between Ray's disappearance and the of his older brother Roy in 1996. Roy had parked his car near a bridge over the Great Miami River in Dayton, Ohio, before taking his own life by drowning. Similarly, Ray's red Mini Cooper was found parked near two bridges over the Susquehanna River in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. The proximity of his car to the river led some to speculate that Ray may have followed in his brother's footsteps. Supporters of this theory point to several factors. First, Ray was reportedly a poor swimmer, and if he had jumped into the river, it is plausible that he could have drowned without leaving behind much physical evidence. Additionally, the location of his car near a riverbank seemed to echo Roy's final act. Investigators also noted that sniffer dogs at the scene displayed behavior suggesting Ray might have exited his vehicle and entered another one or walked toward the water. However, there are significant challenges to this theory. Unlike Roy, Ray had no documented history of depression. His family and close friends consistently described him as someone who was looking forward to retirement later that year and showed no signs of emotional distress leading up to his disappearance. He had plans for the future and appeared content in both his personal and professional life. Another issue with this theory is the absence of a body. Despite thorough searches of the river using divers, sonar equipment, and aerial surveillance under favorable conditions, no trace of Ray was ever found. The riverbed was described as flat rock with clear visibility at the time of the search, making it unlikely that a body could have gone unnoticed. Furthermore, many experts note that individuals who take their own lives often leave behind some form of closure for their loved ones, such as a note or instructions regarding their estate. Ray left no such indications. The second major theory is that Ray was the victim of foul play. As Centre County's district attorney for nearly 2 decades, he prosecuted numerous high-profile cases that could have made him a target for retaliation. Among these cases were substance trafficking operations involving dangerous individuals and even members of organized crime groups like the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. Some speculate that someone he prosecuted may have sought revenge. A potential connection involves Jonathan Luna, an assistant U.S. attorney who was found dead under mysterious circumstances in a creek in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania in 2003, just 2 years before Ray's disappearance. Luna's death remains unsolved, but has fueled speculation about whether there could be a broader pattern involving legal professionals being targeted. The previously mentioned laptop and hard drive, as well as the presence of cigarette ashes inside Ray's car, can all be viewed as supporting this theory. Robert Buhner Jr., a former district attorney and close friend of Ray's, has been an ardent supporter of the foul play theory. He believes there are individuals still alive who know what happened to Ray and may even have been involved in luring him to Lewisburg under false pretenses before harming him. The third major theory posits that Ray staged his own disappearance and voluntarily left his life behind to start anew elsewhere. This idea stems from several intriguing details about his personality and actions leading up to April 15, 2005. Ray had reportedly expressed interest in cases where individuals vanished intentionally and began new lives under different identities. One such case involved a Cleveland police chief who disappeared years earlier. Ray allegedly found this story fascinating and discussed it with colleagues on occasion. There were also multiple unconfirmed sightings of Ray after his disappearance that lend some credence to this theory. The most notable occurred at a bar in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where both a bartender and an off-duty police officer claimed they saw him watching a baseball game on television shortly after April 15th. Other sightings were reported across various states over the following months, but could not be verified. Additionally, Ray had connections to Central Europe through family ties. He was fluent in Slovenian and semi-fluent in Russian. These skills could have facilitated relocation abroad if he chose to flee the country. He also had relatives in Slovenia and had visited them multiple times before his disappearance. However, skeptics argue that this theory is inconsistent with key aspects of Ray's character and circumstances. Those closest to him described him as deeply committed to his daughter Laura and unlikely to abandon her without explanation or contact. Furthermore, there was no activity on his bank accounts or credit cards after April 15th, an unusual detail for someone attempting to start a new life without financial resources. The disappearance of Kirsty Bentley on New Year's Eve 1998 stands as one of New Zealand's most chilling and heavily investigated cases. On December 31, 1998, Kirsty, then 15 years old, spent the morning with her friend Lee Ann Jellyman meeting at the Ashburton Library around 10:30 a.m. The two girls shopped together and had lunch at McDonald's, enjoying the last day of the year and the summer holidays. Kirsty was described as cheerful and looking forward to the upcoming New Year's Eve and her 16th birthday, which was just over 2 weeks away. Lee Ann's sister dropped Kirsty back at her family's South Street home around 2:30 p.m. Upon returning, Kirsty learned from her brother John that her boyfriend had called and left a message. Kirsty called him back at 2:38 but reached only his brother, so she left a message asking her boyfriend to call her back. Afterwards, Kirsty decided to take the family's black Labrador named Abby for a walk. This was a routine she often followed, especially to pass the time. John did not hear her leave, but a neighbor saw Kirsty walking Abby past their house at approximately 3:05 p.m., heading in the direction of the Ashburton River, a popular spot for dog walkers and swimmers on hot days. Several other potential sightings were reported, but the 3:05 p.m. sighting is the last confirmed. Kirsty was wearing a black tank top, a blue sarong with a white butterfly pattern, and black Colorado shoes with white soles. She also wore a scrunchie on her wrist and her hair was down, which was said to be unusual as she always wore it up when out for a walk. Kirsty's boyfriend returned her call at 4:30, but John noticed that Kirsty was still not home. When their mother, Jill, arrived home from work at around 5:15, John immediately told her that Kirsty was gone. Jill's concern quickly grew, especially as she noticed Abby's dog lead was missing from its usual place by the back door, and Kirsty had not left any note or message. Jill's sense of dread, which she later described as a mother's intuition, drove her to immediately check the river track where Kirsty would typically walk Abby. Kirsty. She walked the route, calling out for her daughter and the dog, but found nothing. Overcome with panic, she turned back before reaching Abby's favorite swimming hole. After returning home, Jill and John agreed to wait until 6 p.m. before searching again, hoping Kirsty would return on her own. Just before 6, John set out to search the dog walking route. Shortly after, Kirsty's father Sid arrived home and was told about the situation. Recognizing the seriousness, Sid immediately called the police to report Kirsty missing at around 6:20 p.m. Jill went back out to search, and Sid, despite suffering from a migraine, joined a neighbor to check the riverbank, even vomiting on the way due to his condition. John continued searching, eventually joining Jill on the river track, and later, police sent him out on his bike to check another section of the track. Sid picked up John around 8, but John soon went back out to join other searchers, including his uncle, and continued searching until about 12:30 a.m. Sid also continued searching on his own after 8 p.m. As darkness fell, the search intensified. Friends, neighbors, and local police officers joined the effort, scouring the neighborhood, building yards, and the northern riverbank and its paths. The mood grew increasingly grim as the hours passed without any sign of Kirsty or Abby. The search continued through the night, but nothing was found. Kirsty's disappearance quickly became a large-scale emergency. By the next morning, January 1st, 1999, an official search and rescue operation was launched at 8 a.m. with police, family, friends, and volunteers combing the Ashburton riverbank and surrounding areas. The New Zealand Army even sent troops from Burnham Military Camp to assist in the search, reflecting the scale and urgency of the operation. Around 10 a.m. on January 1st, 2 hours into the official search, searchers heard barking and found Abby tied to a tree in a patch of dense bush just off one of the river walking tracks Kirsty often used. The area had been searched the previous night, but Abby had not been found. Abby was dehydrated but unharmed. The way she was tied up suggested she had been unleashed before being tethered, indicating that whoever tied her up knew the dog and how to handle her. Near the spot where Abby was found, searchers discovered 2 items of clothing, underwear and boxer shorts, resting on top of blackberry bushes about 2 meters from the ground and roughly 30 meters from where Abby was tied. These were later confirmed to belong to Kirsty. The underwear showed no signs of being torn or forcibly removed, and there was no evidence of a struggle at the scene. The clothing Kirsty was wearing when last seen was not ripped or damaged, and the items did not appear to have been dragged or thrown onto the bushes. The family initially thought the lead used to tie Abby was not the one Kirsty had taken from home, adding to the confusion. The scene immediately raised suspicions among investigators. Detective Senior Sergeant Lance Corcoran, who led the original investigation, believed from the outset that the crime scene was staged to mislead police. This theory was later supported by international criminal profiler Chuck Burton, who reviewed the files years later. The lack of signs of a struggle, the placement of the underwear, and Abby's silence all suggested that someone familiar with Kirsty or Abby or both had orchestrated the scene. With the discovery of Abby and Kirsty's clothing, the focus of the search shifted, but no further trace of Kirsty was found. Over the next 16 days, police and volunteers meticulously searched the Ashburton area and the wider Canterbury district, expanding the search radius as hope for finding Kirsty alive began to fade. Police interviewed hundreds of local men, canvassed neighborhoods, and followed up on every reported sighting and piece of information. Rumors and suspicions swirled throughout the community, with many people speculating about possible suspects and motives. In the immediate aftermath, police turned their attention to those closest to her. Both Kirsty's father and her older brother were considered suspects in the early stages of the investigation. This was not unusual. Statistically, family members are often the first to be investigated in cases involving the sudden disappearance or death of a child or teenager. The intense scrutiny of the Bentley family was compounded by the lack of any immediate evidence pointing to an outside perpetrator and by inconsistencies in their recollections of the day's events. Sid Bentley's movements on December 31st, 1998 became a particular focus. Initially, he told police he had spent the day in Christchurch and Littleton, but he later revised his account, claiming he had hit his head and forgotten that he was actually in Ashburton for part of the day. This shifting story raised suspicions, though Sid's family believed his embarrassment and confusion were unrelated to the crime. John Bentley, who was 19 at the time, also faced police questioning and acknowledged in interviews that it was only logical for investigators to consider him and his father as suspects. Police conducted a thorough forensic examination of the Bentley home, including luminol, testing for traces of blood or evidence of violence. These tests, however, yielded nothing of value. No blood or forensic evidence linked the family to Kirsty's disappearance or death. Ultimately, neither Sid nor John was ever charged, and as the years passed, police publicly stated there was no evidence implicating them. By 2018, investigators confirmed that they no longer believed Sid or John were involved in the crime. One of the most persistent mysteries in the investigation has been the staging of the scene where Kirsty's dog, Abby, and her underwear were found. Both retired British Detective Inspector Chuck Burton, who reviewed the case at the request of New Zealand Police, and Detective Senior Sergeant Lance Corcoran, who led the Ashburton CIB at the time, concluded the scene was likely staged to mislead investigators and protect the killer's identity. Burton's review, conducted years after the murder, led him to believe that the perpetrator had an emotional connection to Kirsty, possibly someone she knew or trusted. The careful placement of her body in the Rakaya Gorge, some 40 kilometers from Ashburton, further suggested a degree of planning and familiarity with the local landscape. Both Burton and Lance agreed that the killer likely had local knowledge and may have frequented the areas where Kirsty and Abby walked. As the investigation progressed, police considered hundreds of potential suspects, at times narrowing the list to as few as 20 individuals, but never formally eliminating many from inquiry. Among the local men who became persons of interest was one named Barry Hepburn. He was a physically strong farm worker known for walking his Alsatian dog along the same river trail as Kirsty. Hepburn, who had the mental age of a teenager, was seen in the area around the time of Kirsty's disappearance. He did not show up for work on New Year's Day and was later seen unusually well groomed. Despite these suspicions, there was no evidence to directly link him to the crime. Another suspect was named Charlie Smith, a resident of Rakaya who repainted his Ford Falcon after Kirsty's disappearance and was rumored to have boasted about involvement in her death. Police investigated these claims but could not substantiate them. One particular lead investigators spent a lot of time on was that involving a green Commer van. A relatively rare green van was spotted in the vicinity of both the abduction site and the gorge around the time of the murder. Police invested thousands of hours trying to track down this vehicle, but it was never found and its significance remains unresolved. In more recent years, Detective Inspector Greg Merton and other investigators now believe that the killer was likely a local cannabis user or grower, as the area where the victim was found was known to be popular for cultivation. The fact that her remains were discovered by two men searching for cannabis plots added weight to this theory. Police do not believe Kirsty was killed at the gorge. Rather, she was likely abducted while walking Abby, held elsewhere, and then her body was transported and hidden in the gorge sometime later. Another significant figure investigated was Russell John Tully, a local man who would later gain infamy for murdering two staff members at the Ashburton Work and Income Office in 2014. Tully had camped in the Ashburton area around the time of Kirsty's disappearance, which initially raised suspicions. However, in 2018, police announced that Russell had been eliminated from the inquiry after providing a detailed account of his whereabouts and was no longer considered a suspect. Chris Jenkins was a 21-year-old senior at the University of Minnesota, majoring in business and known for his athleticism as a lacrosse goalie. Raised in Eden Prairie, a suburb of the Twin Cities, Chris was described by friends and family as kind, helpful, and principled. He was the type of person who stood up for others, such as a neighbor with epilepsy who was bullied at school. Chris always intervened on her behalf. His reputation as a reliable friend and a dedicated athlete was well established among his peers. He lived in Dinkytown, a lively neighborhood just off the university campus, and was in a relationship with Ashley Rice at the time. The two, along with their friends, were active participants in the university's social scene and frequently attended parties and local bars. Halloween 2002 was a particularly special occasion for Chris. It was his first Halloween as a legal adult able to drink, and he was eager to celebrate. That evening, he and his roommates hosted a keg party at their house before heading out for the night. Around 10:30 p.m., Chris, Ashley, and three friends left for the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis. Ashley, who worked at the Lone Tree Bar, was not on duty that night but joined the group as a patron. Notably, Chris's costume did not have pockets, so Ashley carried his wallet, phone, and keys for him. The weather that night was harsh, with temperatures dropping to around 24 degrees Fahrenheit, making it the coldest night of October in Minneapolis. This detail would later become crucial, as Chris would end up outside in only his costume without any means to keep warm or contact anyone. The bar was bustling with Halloween revelers, and Chris's group blended into the crowd. Accounts of what transpired inside the bar differ, but several key details have emerged. At some point during the night, an altercation broke out between two young men after one allegedly hit on someone else's girlfriend. Chris reportedly intervened to break up the dispute, and in the process, his beer spilled onto his lap. This incident, whether accidental or not, appears to have played a role in what happened next. There are conflicting reports about the circumstances that led to Chris being removed from the bar. Some sources suggest that he was kicked out because of the spilled beer, while others believe that the earlier altercation or a potential misunderstanding with security staff contributed to the decision. It is also possible that Chris left voluntarily after becoming upset about something he learned or witnessed, perhaps involving his girlfriend and another man. Regardless of the exact reason, the consensus is that Chris was escorted out of the Lone Tree Bar around midnight alone and visibly intoxicated. Once outside, he found himself in a vulnerable position. He had no jacket, wallet, phone, or keys. They were all inside the bar with Ashley. The temperature was well below freezing, and Chris was dressed only in his thin Halloween costume. He had no ride home and no means to contact anyone. This scenario, combined with his emotional state, having just been involved in a confrontation and possibly embarrassed by being ejected from the bar, left him exposed and at risk. The next morning, Ashley went to Chris's house to return his belongings, only to find that he had not come home. Alarmed, she contacted his parents, Jan and Steve Jenkins, who immediately reported him missing. However, the police response was initially slow. It took 5 days before they began investigating the disappearance in earnest. Early on, authorities speculated that Chris might have left town on a whim, despite the fact that he had no money, identification, phone, or even a coat to protect him from the harsh Minnesota weather. From the start, Chris's family and friends were deeply concerned and proactive in their search. They worked closely with law enforcement and even hired private investigator Chuck Loesch to assist in the effort. Bloodhounds were brought in twice, once within the first week and again several weeks later. Both times, the dogs traced Chris's scent from the bar to a nearby underground parking garage where drops of blood were also found. The scent trail ended at the garage, leading some to believe that Chris may have gotten into a car, either willingly or by force. This clue raised troubling possibilities. If Chris had entered a vehicle, it might suggest abduction or foul play. The parking garage was located across from the bar, making it plausible that someone could have been waiting for him or that he was lured or forced into a car. The blood found in the garage added another layer of suspicion, though it was never conclusively linked to Chris. For months, the search would prove fruitless, with leads not progressing the investigation. However, on February 27, 2003, two pedestrians walking along the Mississippi River's south bank near downtown Minneapolis spotted what appeared to be a body caught beneath the 3rd Avenue Bridge. This location was less than 3/4 of a mile from the Lone Tree Bar Grill, where Chris had last been seen on Halloween night the previous year. The sighting was reported to authorities shortly before 4 p.m. that Thursday. Responders from the Hennepin County Sheriff's Department and local police arrived on the scene and began the difficult process of recovering the body. The effort was complicated by the river's swift current and the presence of ice chunks, which made the operation hazardous and prolonged. It took more than 2 hours to retrieve the remains from the water. The body was found in a mass of debris, partially frozen into the river ice, and was described as being on the south bank, across from the St. Anthony main area. The temperature at the time was just above freezing. The recovery site was close enough to Jenkins' last known location that it immediately raised questions about how he had ended up in the river and whether he had entered the water nearby or been transported from elsewhere. After the body was recovered, it was transported to the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's office for identification. Because the body had been in the water for an extended period, dental records provided by the Jenkins family were used to confirm the identity as Chris Jenkins. The family, who had been holding out hope for Chris's safe return, was notified by their private investigator, Chuck Loesch, after police contacted Chris's father, Steve Jenkins. The news was devastating for the Jenkins family and their friends, who had spent months organizing search efforts, managing a command center, and fielding tips that had dwindled in the weeks prior to the discovery. The emotional toll was immense. Friends like Chris Bailey, Jenkins' lacrosse team co-captain, expressed a sense of emptiness and disappointment, especially since the body was found in an area that volunteers had already searched. There was no sense of closure, only a shift from hope to a pressing need for answers about what had happened. Details about the condition of Chris Jenkins' body became a focal point in the investigation and subsequent public debate. When found, Chris was still wearing the same American Indian costume he had donned for Halloween. This included his shirt, which was tucked into his drawstring pants, and his oversized slip-on shoes, both of which remained on his feet. He also still wore a necklace and rings on both hands. The neatness of his clothing and the fact that his shoes were still on stood out as unusual. Most drowning victims are found face down, with their clothing in disarray and often missing one or both shoes due to the vigorous movements associated with drowning and the river's current. Perhaps most striking was the position of Chris's body. He was found floating on his back, with his arms crossed over his chest. This posture is highly atypical for drowning victims, who are generally discovered with their arms and legs splayed out, a result of instinctive paddling and struggling in the water. The arms crossed position, combined with the intact clothing, led some experts and family members to speculate that Chris may have been placed in the water after death or while unconscious. Another detail that drew attention was the presence of a wad of hair clutched in Chris's hand. Forensic testing later determined that the hair belonged to Chris himself. The significance of this finding remains debated. Some interpret it as a sign of a struggle, while others note that hair can be pulled out during the process of drowning or as a result of decomposition. The body showed little visible decomposition despite having been in the river for months, likely due to the cold water temperatures, which can slow down the process. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no broken bones, gunshot wounds, or other injuries that would immediately suggest a violent death. The absence of bruising or other marks was noted, but it was also acknowledged that a body in water for an extended period can lose such evidence, making it difficult to determine if foul play occurred. The county medical examiner, working in consultation with a Milwaukee medical examiner at the family's request, performed a thorough autopsy. The process included external and internal examinations, microscopic analysis of tissue, and toxicology testing. The preliminary autopsy found no evidence of death by trauma from an unnatural source, such as a gunshot or stabbing, nor did it suggest natural causes. The body did show signs of having been in the water for a considerable time, but the exact duration was hard to determine. There were also reports, though not universally confirmed, of GHB, a date rape drug, in his system. Medical professionals noted that the human body naturally produces some GHB after death, and the levels found in Chris's body were not conclusively outside the range expected from decomposition. One notable autopsy finding was that Chris had very little water in his lungs. This detail is significant because in most drowning cases, victims inhale large amounts of water during their struggle to breathe. The relative dryness of Chris's lungs raised questions about whether he was alive when he entered the water or if he had died beforehand. However, experts cautioned that after months in the river, it is difficult to draw firm conclusions from such findings, as water would eventually fill the lungs regardless of the cause of death. Within days of the body's recovery, officials announced that the probable cause of death was drowning. The manner of death, however, was left undetermined. Law enforcement initially leaned toward accidental drowning or suicide, citing Chris's intoxication and emotional state on the night he disappeared. Public statements from police suggested they considered suicide a likely explanation, though the Jenkins family and many friends adamantly rejected this idea, insisting that Chris had shown no signs of depression or intent. Unwilling to rely solely on the official investigation, Jan and Steve Jenkins launched their own parallel inquiry. They hired private investigators and brought in bloodhounds to retrace Chris's last known steps. The family also consulted hydrologists to analyze river currents and theorize how and where Chris's body may have entered the water. The family was relentless in following up on every possible lead, no matter how unconventional. They posted flyers, organized search parties, and canvassed the area for witnesses. At times, their desperation led them to consult psychics and consider conspiracy theories, including the possibility of a satanic cult or the so-called smiley face killer being involved in Chris's death. The family's relentless advocacy eventually paid off. In 2005, a significant development occurred when an incarcerated individual came forward with information about the death. This jailhouse informant claimed that Chris had been the victim of an attempted robbery on the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. According to the informant, when the assailants realized Chris had nothing to steal, they became enraged and threw him over the bridge railing. The specificity of the informant's account, including the location and circumstances, lent it credibility in the eyes of investigators. Spurred by this new lead and the persistent efforts of the Jenkins family, the Minneapolis Police Department reopened the case. In November 2006, authorities made a public announcement that Chris Jenkins' death had been reclassified as a homicide. Additionally, the police department issued a formal apology to Jan and Steve for mistakes made during the initial investigation, acknowledging that their earlier conclusions had been premature and that the family's concerns were valid. As of 2025, the death of Chris Jenkins remains unsolved. Despite the reclassification of the case as a homicide and the tireless efforts of his family, no one has been charged in connection with his death. On another note, Chris's mother has publicly speculated about the possible involvement of law enforcement in her son's removal from the bar. She theorized that an off-duty police officer may have orchestrated Chris's ejection to pursue his girlfriend, who was also at the bar that night. However, this theory is based largely on family suspicion and has not been substantiated by independent investigation or corroborated by police records. In the early morning hours of April 29, 1991, Richard Dick Hansen, a 36-year-old former Santa Clara University football star and electronics industry manager, was shot and killed near the Fremont Avenue exit on northbound Highway 85 in Sunnyvale, California. Hansen, who had recently divorced and was the father of 2 young daughters, was accompanied that night by a woman known publicly only as Jean. She remains the sole eyewitness to the crime, and her identity has been carefully protected by law enforcement and the media. Dick Hansen and Jean began their evening at Original Joe's restaurant in downtown San Jose around 10 p.m. The two had known each other socially, and Hansen, recently divorced, sought companionship for a night out. After dinner, they drove approximately 5 miles to a local nightclub in Jean's car, leaving Hansen's pickup truck parked outside the restaurant. They stayed at the club until approximately 1:45 a.m., at which point they returned to the restaurant parking lot to retrieve Hansen's truck. While seated in Jean's car, a light gray or blue 1970 Pontiac GTO Le Mans pulled up behind them. Jean initially assumed the driver might be waiting to access a nearby mailbox and asked Hansen if she should move her car forward. Hansen dismissed the concern, stating there was sufficient space. Moments later, Hansen exited Jean's vehicle and entered his truck, planning to lead her to the freeway since she was unfamiliar with the area. As Hansen and Jean departed the parking lot, the Pontiac began tailing them. Hansen signaled for Jean to follow him onto northbound Highway 280, which merges into Highway 85 near Sunnyvale. Over the next 10 to 12 miles, the suspect's vehicle mirrored Jean's every move, maintaining a close distance despite her attempts to evade him. She abruptly slowed down and changed lanes multiple times before Hansen noticed the situation through his rearview mirror. Jean later recounted feeling increasingly alarmed, later telling investigators she suggested to Hansen via hand signals that they drive to a police station. However, Hansen either did not understand or simply chose to confront the stalker directly. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Hansen exited Highway 85 at the Fremont Avenue exit in Sunnyvale, turning onto a residential street. Jean followed, parking behind Hansen's truck. The Pontiac pulled up directly behind her, blocking her vehicle. Hansen exited his truck and walked past Jean's car, instructing her to stay inside. He approached the driver's side window of the Pontiac and shouted, "What are you doing?" According to Jean's account, the suspect gestured toward her car, specifically her personalized license plate reading 49er Hugs. She added that Hansen proceeded to yell at the driver, telling him to, quote, "Get the hell out of here." Shortly after, the suspect drew a handgun and fired 2 shots at close range, striking Hansen in the chest and neck. Jean, frozen in fear, locked eyes with the shooter through her rearview mirror for several seconds before he sped away. She then exited her car and rushed to Hansen, who was lying unconscious on the pavement. A passing motorist stopped to assist, summoning paramedics, but Hansen was pronounced dead at Stanford University Hospital shortly after arrival. The investigation into Hansen's murder faced significant challenges due to the lack of physical evidence, conflicting witness accounts, and the absence of a clear motive. The shooter was described as a white male 30 to 40 years old, with a dark or olive complexion and large black-framed glasses. He drove a 1970 Pontiac GTO Le Mans, a two-door coupe with faded light gray or blue paint and no front license plate. Despite the car's distinctiveness, searches of DMV records and public tips failed to identify the vehicle. Police withheld the caliber of the bullets used in the shooting, intending to use this detail to verify any future confessions. Jean's account formed the backbone of the investigation, though her timeline contained inconsistencies. For example, she initially claimed the suspect first appeared at the restaurant parking lot, but later suggested he might have followed them from the nightclub. Furthermore, investigators ruled her out as a suspect early on, citing her cooperation and the absence of motive. However, online sleuths later questioned her decision to exit her car post-shooting and inconsistencies in her statements. The most publicized theory centered on Jean's 49er Hugs license plate. Police speculated the shooter mistook Hansen for a San Francisco 49ers player, possibly due to his athletic build. The killer allegedly gestured toward the license plate before firing, prompting theories of a deranged sports fan targeting Hansen. Some supporting factors include the fact that the 49ers had recently lost the Super Bowl 3 months earlier. This loss may have fueled fan frustration. Additionally, Hansen bore a resemblance to Harris Barton, a San Francisco offensive lineman at the time. A Dates from Hell episode suggested the killer might have confused Hansen with Barton, who faced criticism for the team's loss. But a counter-argument that skeptics bring up is the license plate was on Jean's car, not Hansen's, and the shooter followed both vehicles equally. Some theorize the killer was fixated on Jean, not Hansen. His decision to spare her life and stare at her before fleeing suggested a personal connection. Some investigators noted the killer's gesture toward Jean's car might have been directed at her, not the license plate. A different avenue suggests Hansen's recent divorce and occasional confrontational behavior led to a vendetta. Friends described him as charismatic but prone to playful headlocks, which some found aggressive. There were fringe rumors that Hansen was involved in provocative or shady hobbies and vices that might have played a role. However, police found no evidence. There's also the possibility that this was a random act of violence by a mentally unstable individual. Despite the media attention and numerous theories, the case quickly went cold. The composite sketch of the suspect and the detailed description of the car failed to generate any significant leads. Born on October 21, 1984, Tiffany Nelson was described by her family as a sweet, kind, and energetic child. She spent her early years in Augusta, Georgia, where she was raised primarily by her mother. Her father, Vernon, was not very present during her early childhood, but began to see her more often after a family tragedy. In 1992, when Tiffany was just 7 years old, her mother passed away. This loss brought her extended family closer together, and her aunt, Ora Parrish, stepped in as Tiffany's guardian, taking her into her home on Getson Drive in the Faith Village neighborhood of South Augusta. Despite the heartbreak of losing her mother, Tiffany remained warm and compassionate in her family. She became especially close with her aunt, cousins, and other relatives who all rallied to support her. Her cousin Benita remembered Tiffany as something of a tomboy. Tiffany's niece, Stephanie, who was close in age, recalled their relationship as being more like sisters than aunt and niece, filled with sleepovers, bedtime stories, and shared childhood memories. By the summer of 1994, Tiffany was 9 years old and looking forward to the freedom of summer vacation. June 6, 1994 was the first Monday of her break from school, a day that for many children signals the start of carefree days and endless possibilities. The weather in Augusta that morning was warm but not overly humid, with temperatures in the lower 80s. Tiffany woke up early, spent some time with her aunt, and then set out on her red 10-speed bicycle. The bike was a prized possession and an extension of her adventurous spirit. That morning, the tires on her bike were a bit flat, so Tiffany decided to ride to a nearby gas station and convenience store to fill them with air. The route from her home to the gas station was short, just a quarter of a mile and 2 corners away. She rode down Neal Street, took a left on Ruby Drive, and then a right onto Richmond Hill Drive, which led her to the intersection with Lumpkin Road. The Amoco gas station, located at this busy intersection, was a familiar and accessible place for Tiffany. Witnesses later reported seeing her at around 10 a.m. using the air pumps to inflate her bike tires. She was wearing a multicolored flower shirt, blue and white denim shorts, and blue and white Air Jordan sneakers, clothing that would later become significant in identifying her remains. After that sighting, Tiffany was never seen alive again. When she failed to return home, her aunt Ora Parrish quickly reported her missing. The initial response from law enforcement was to treat the case as a missing person, with some officials suggesting early on that Tiffany might have run away. This approach drew criticism from her family, who insisted that Tiffany would never have left on her own and that the possibility of foul play should have been considered from the outset. On June 7th, the day after Tiffany's disappearance, the Augusta Police Department and Richmond County Sheriff's Office began a door-to-door search. They retraced her likely route from her home to the gas station, canvassed the neighborhood, and searched the woods behind the Amoco station, but found no trace of Tiffany or her bicycle. The police released descriptions of Tiffany and her clothing to the media, highlighting a blemish-type scar under her right eye and a thin scar on her forehead above her left eye, hoping that someone might recognize her or come forward with information. A tip soon came in from a woman whose grandson, an 11-year-old boy, claimed to have seen Tiffany on the morning of her disappearance. According to the boy, he saw the girl in the backseat of a two-door car driven by a man wearing a hat. This sighting was reported to have occurred off Barton Chapel Road, about 4 miles west of the gas station where Tiffany was last seen. However, police were unable to substantiate the tip or gather enough information to pursue it further. Despite the urgency of the situation, the search for Tiffany quickly began to stall. On June 16th, cadaver dogs from Fort Gordon's K-9 unit were brought in to search a wooded area near the gas station, but they found nothing. Tiffany's story was featured on the television program America's Most Wanted on June 18th, in the hope that national exposure would generate new leads. Unfortunately, this effort did not produce any breakthroughs. For weeks, a 5-man investigative team continued canvassing the area, questioning residents and searching for any witnesses who might have seen Tiffany or her bike. The fact that she disappeared at 10 a.m. on a Monday meant that many people were at work and few had information to offer. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the disappearance of Tiffany's bicycle. It was never found, leading investigators to believe that whoever had taken Tiffany must have had a vehicle large enough to transport both her and the bicycle without attracting attention. Law enforcement initially treated Tiffany's disappearance as a missing person case rather than a suspected abduction, which meant that critical early leads may have been missed. The family later expressed frustration that the case was not immediately classified as a potential kidnapping, especially given the circumstances and Tiffany's reliable character. As the months and years passed, Tiffany's case remained unsolved. In 1996, the Augusta Police Department merged with the Richmond County Sheriff's Office, and her case files were transferred over. Detectives periodically reviewed the notes, hoping that a fresh perspective might yield new clues, but the trail remained cold. It was not until 1999 that the case was seriously revisited, prompted by the disappearance of another child in the Augusta area. In April 1999, 6-year-old Keenan O'Malley disappeared while riding his bike in North Augusta, South Carolina. The similarities between his case and Tiffany's, both young children last seen on bicycles, drew renewed attention to Tiffany's disappearance. However, unlike Tiffany, Keenan's body was found the next day, and his killer, William Ernest Downs, was quickly identified and arrested. Downs was later questioned about Tiffany's case but denied any involvement, and investigators found no evidence linking him to her disappearance. Yet again, the case stalled and hope dwindled. However, speed up to May 16, 2005, a major breakthrough occurred. 2 men discovered skeletal remains in a shallow grave off Farmers Bridge Road in Burke County, approximately 15 miles from where Tiffany was last seen. The remains were identified as Tiffany's through mitochondrial DNA testing, which matched maternal relatives, and by the presence of her distinctive blue and white Air Jordan sneakers. Unfortunately, due to the advanced state of decomposition, the medical examiner could not determine the cause of death or whether Tiffany had been sexually assaulted. The discovery of her remains shifted the case from a missing person investigation to a homicide. The confirmation of Tiffany's identity brought a measure of relief to her family and the community, but it also reignited the investigation. The GBI and local law enforcement shifted their focus to determining how the girl had died and who was responsible. Unfortunately, the advanced state of decomposition meant that forensic investigators were unable to establish a cause of death or determine whether Tiffany had been assaulted. This lack of physical evidence limited the avenues available to detectives, forcing them to rely more heavily on witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, and any new tips that might emerge. In the weeks following the discovery, law enforcement made public appeals for information, hoping that the renewed attention would jog memories or encourage someone with knowledge of the crime to come forward. The media reported extensively on the case, emphasizing the tragic circumstances and the long wait for answers. Tiffany's family, while grateful to have her remains returned, expressed frustration and sadness that so many questions remained unanswered. They continued to call for justice and urged anyone with information to contact authorities. More than 50 volunteers, including family members, friends, and concerned citizens, participated in a search of the area surrounding the burial site. They combed the woods for any additional evidence, clothing, personal items, or clues that might have been overlooked during the initial excavation. Despite their efforts, no new evidence was found that could advance the investigation or shed light on Tiffany's final moments. The investigation, which spanned decades, was marked by missed opportunities, unsubstantiated leads, and persistent uncertainty about what happened to Tiffany after she disappeared on June 6, 1994. A particularly intriguing unresolved element is the reported sighting of Tiffany in the backseat of a two-door car driven by a man in a hat. This sighting allegedly occurred off Barton Chapel Road, about 4 miles from where Tiffany was last seen. However, details about this tip were never fully disclosed, and police ultimately deemed it not credible due to insufficient information. The lack of follow-up or additional witness corroboration leaves open the question of whether this sighting was a genuine clue or a red herring. The complete disappearance of Tiffany's bicycle remains another point of intrigue. Bicycles are not easily concealed or transported without a vehicle, especially a 10-speed model, which would have been cumbersome in a small car. The fact that her bike was never seen again strongly suggests premeditation and access to a larger vehicle, such as a truck or van. This aspect of the case has fueled speculation that the perpetrator may have been someone familiar with the area and able to act quickly and decisively without drawing attention. In November 1992, 3 teenage girls, Miriam Iborra, Antonia Rodriguez, often referred to as Tony, and Desiree Fulch, aged 14, 15, and 14 respectively, vanished after hitchhiking from their hometown of Alcácer to a nightclub in the nearby town of Picassent. What followed was their tragic disappearance, followed by an even more disturbing discovery. Additionally, this incident exposed deep flaws in Spain's investigative processes and sparked a media frenzy that would change the country's approach to crime reporting. On the evening of November 13, 1992, the 3 girls set out to attend a secondary school party at the Cooler nightclub about 4 kilometers away from their hometown. Their original plan was to get a ride from Miriam's father, Fernando Garcia, but he was unable to drive them due to illness. The girls, accustomed to hitchhiking in their small community, decided to seek a lift as they had done before. A young couple from Alcácer picked them up and dropped them off at a petrol station near Picassent. At this location, witnesses later reported seeing the girls enter a white Opel Corsa with 4 men inside. This was the last confirmed sighting of Miriam, Tony, and Desiree alive. When the girls failed to return home that night, their families immediately reported them missing. The local authorities, however, initially treated the incident as a case of runaways, which delayed the launch of a formal investigation. As days passed and the girls did not reappear, concern grew and the Civil Guard began to take the case more seriously. Over the next 75 days, the search for the girls became increasingly desperate. Volunteers, neighbors, and the media joined the effort, scouring the region for any sign of the missing teenagers. Sporadic leads and unconfirmed sightings were reported, but none led to any breakthroughs. The families, particularly Miriam's father, became vocal advocates for a more thorough investigation, often appearing in the media to keep public attention on the case. On January 27, 1993, heavy rains in the region softened the earth in the remote mountainous area of La Romana Ravine near the Tous Reservoir. 2 beekeepers tending to their hives in the area noticed something unusual, a partially exposed shallow grave. Upon closer inspection, they discovered the decomposed bodies of the 3 girls buried together. The state of the remains indicated that the girls had suffered extreme violence. Forensic examination revealed that Desiree had been stabbed twice in the back and had suffered traumatic removal of a portion of her right breast. Miriam's body bore evidence of severe vaginal injuries caused by a rough-edged instrument, possibly inflicted after death. Tony had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. All three victims showed signs of prolonged restraint, with ligature marks on their wrists, broken teeth, and other indications of torture and sexual assault. Their clothing was largely intact, though Desiree's shirt and bra had been cut open and tied in front. The gruesome discovery triggered a rapid and intense investigation. The civil guard quickly focused on two local men with criminal records, Miguel Ricart and Antonio Angules. At the crime scene, investigators found several pieces of evidence linking the suspects to the murders, including a glove belonging to Miguel, a social security slip bearing the name of Antonio's brother, Enrique Martins, and a 9mm shell casing from a Star Model BM handgun. Miguel, born in 1969 in Catarroja, had a criminal record but was not as notorious as his associate Antonio. After the discovery of the bodies, Miguel was apprehended and, under police interrogation, confessed to his role in the crime. According to his statement, he and Antonio picked up the girls at the petrol station. When Miriam, Tony, and Desiree realized that they were not being taken to the nightclub as promised, they began to panic and scream. Antonio responded by pistol whipping them, and the two men drove the girls to an abandoned house near La Romana, a remote and isolated area. Miguel described in detail how the girls were raped, tortured, and ultimately murdered. Two of the girls were assaulted first, and after a failed attempt to buy food in Caradao, the third girl was raped. The ordeal lasted for hours. The men had already dug a pit into which they forced the girls before further assaulting and ultimately killing them. Miguel also admitted that after the murders, he and Antonio attempted to clean the car and retrieve spent shell casings to eliminate evidence. Despite these efforts, the items left at the scene directly implicated them in the crime. As for Antonio, he was born in 1966 and was a Brazilian Spanish national with a long history of violence, theft, and drug offenses. He was known for his volatile temperament and abusive behavior even towards his own family, and was considered extremely dangerous. Antonio had previously escaped from prison during a furlough in March 1992, and by the time of the Alcácer murders, he was already wanted by authorities for other crimes. According to Miguel's confession and the evidence found at the scene, Antonio was the ringleader and the most violent of the two. When the civil guard went to his family home looking for Enrique, whose name appeared on the slip found at the crime scene, Antonio was not there. He had already gone into hiding, setting off a nationwide manhunt. Antonio's escape from justice became a story of its own, marked by a series of near captures and sightings. He first hid in various locations around Valencia, skillfully evading police cordons. He was almost apprehended in the town of Villamarxant, but managed to escape. His last confirmed sighting in Spain was in Minglanilla, Cuenca. From there, he traveled to Lisbon, Portugal, where he is believed to have boarded the container ship City of Plymouth as a stowaway in March 1993. The pursuit took on an international dimension when a British sailor on the City of Plymouth discovered a stowaway, believed to be Antonio, on board as the ship sailed from Lisbon to Liverpool. The sailor locked the stowaway in a cabin, but by the next morning, the man had escaped through a window. He was later spotted adrift on a raft off the coast of Ireland by a French reconnaissance aircraft, prompting the ship to circle back and retrieve him. Once again locked in a cabin, the stowaway managed to escape a second time, this time using a rope to reach the docks in Dublin before Irish police could apprehend him. From this point, Antonio's trail went cold. Some believe he died at sea, succumbing to the cold waters off Ireland, while others theorize that as a dual Spanish-Brazilian national, he used his Brazilian passport to return to Brazil and has been living there ever since. Despite periodic reactivations of the search and new lines of inquiry, including the interrogation of ship crew and associates in Lisbon as recently as 2021, Antonio remains one of Interpol's most wanted fugitives, and his whereabouts are unknown. Miguel was tried and convicted in 1997, receiving a sentence of 170 years in prison for his role in the crime. However, Spanish law at the time capped the maximum time served at 30 years, and later changes in European law led to Miguel's early release after just 21 years in 2013. Upon release, he largely disappeared from the public eye, reportedly living for a time in southern France before being spotted in Madrid in 2020. Danette Millbrook and Jeanette Millbrook were fraternal twins born on April 2nd, 1974 in Augusta, Georgia. Described as inseparable, the sisters shared a close bond, with Danette often acting as the more assertive protector of the shy and reserved Jeanette. Both stood out for their distinctive Jerry curl hairstyles, pierced ears, and matching scars above their navels from a childhood surgical procedure. Danette was slightly taller at 5 foot 6 inches and 130 pounds, while Jeanette was 5 foot 4 inches and 125 pounds. The twins attended Lucy Laney High School, where they were known as responsible students with no history of behavioral issues beyond a minor altercation in 1989 when Danette defended Jeanette from a bully at a bus stop. The events of March 18, 1990 began uneventfully. Around midday, the twins accompanied their mother, Louise Sturgis, to Church's Chicken on Laney Walker Boulevard. During this outing, they mentioned to Louise that a man in a white van had followed them for part of their walk, a detail that would later loom large in the investigation. After returning home, the girls set out on foot to complete errands, unaware it would be their final day in the public eye. Before the disappearance, there were several key stops that the twins made. They visited their godfather's residence to borrow $20 for bus fare, as their family had recently moved to a neighborhood farther from their school. He provided the money along with extra cash for snacks, and later recalled nothing unusual about their demeanor. Around mid-afternoon, the sisters stopped at their cousin's house, where they asked her to walk home with them. The cousin's mother refused, citing that it would turn dark soon. Family members later noted the unusual nature of this request, as the twins had never previously sought companionship for routine walks. The girls then visited their older sister, Shanta Sturgis, who had recently given birth. They stayed for approximately 15 minutes and again asked for someone to accompany them home. Shanta, preoccupied with her newborn, declined. This repeated plea for company struck relatives as out of character. At 4:30 p.m., the twins arrived at the pump and shop on the corner of 12th Street and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The clerk, Gloria, who knew the girls, sold them chips, candy, and soda. She later reported that they appeared calm and showed no signs of distress. Notably, Gloria did not witness them leave the store or interact with anyone outside, though she recalled a vehicle parked nearby. This sighting marked the last confirmed moment the twins were seen alive. At the time of their disappearance, Jeanette wore a blue pullover over a white turtleneck, a beige skirt, white stockings, and sneakers. Danette sported a white Mickey Mouse shirt, white jeans, and black shoes. Additionally, they had scars around their navels. These critical details were later muddled in police reports due to clerical errors, which was a recurring issue that hampered the investigation. When the twins failed to return home by nightfall, Louise grew increasingly anxious. After waiting through the evening, she contacted authorities the following morning, March 19th, only to be told she must wait 24 hours before filing an official missing persons report, a policy later criticized as negligent. By the time police initiated a search, critical early leads had likely gone cold. Within a year, the authorities closed the case, offering the family inconsistent and ultimately false explanations. The Sturgis family was told the twins had either aged out of foster care or had simply turned 17, the legal age at which minors could no longer be classified as missing. Both explanations were demonstrably incorrect. The twins were only 16 at the time, and there was no record of their involvement in foster care. To make matters worse, a juvenile case officer erroneously reported that the girls had been found, which led to their removal from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. This error effectively erased their case from national missing persons registries, severely limiting both public awareness and investigative momentum. The investigation was further hampered by a series of egregious errors in the official documentation, many of which persisted for decades. The twins' surname was repeatedly misspelled as Millbrooks in police reports and national databases, and Jeanette's middle name, Latrice, was incorrectly recorded as Latressa. Such inconsistencies created confusion and made it more difficult for other agencies and the public to connect with the case. There were also discrepancies in the recorded birth dates and the route the girls were believed to have taken home, with early reports incorrectly stating they had traveled down a different street than what witnesses later confirmed. Despite these setbacks, the Millbrook twins family, particularly their sister Shanta, never stopped advocating for answers. After more than 2 decades of persistence, their efforts finally paid off in 2013 when Richmond County's newly elected sheriff, Richard Roundtree, publicly acknowledged the mishandling of the case and reopened the investigation. Roundtree stated, "We think a terrible injustice has been done for the last 20 years, and pledged to address the mistakes of the past." However, the renewed investigation faced significant challenges. With no crime scene, forensic evidence, or reliable physical clues, detectives were forced to rely almost exclusively on decades-old witness statements and family recollections. Complicating matters further, key figures such as the twins' father, John Millbrook, refused to cooperate with the investigation. He declined to provide a DNA sample and, according to reports, told associates to inform police he was dead if they inquired about him. In 2017, the case took another turn when Ernest Vaughns, a convicted murderer with ties to the Millbrook family, sent a letter from prison claiming the twins had died during a drug-related altercation at their father's home and that their bodies had been disposed of at the Mary Brothers brickyard. However, Vaughns' account was riddled with inconsistencies, including a misidentified timeline regarding a suspect's paralysis, and ultimately yielded no actionable evidence. In an effort to leverage modern forensic techniques, the sheriff's office collected DNA samples from the twins' family members in 2017. These samples were compared against unidentified remains in national databases, raising hopes for a breakthrough. One promising lead involved a Jane Doe found in Aiken County, South Carolina in 1993, whose facial reconstruction bore similarities to Jeanette. However, DNA analysis ultimately ruled out any connection, leaving the family without closure. The absence of the twins' dental records further hampered forensic efforts, as did the inevitable degradation of any physical evidence over the decades. As of 2024, the sheriff's office maintains that the case remains active, but meaningful progress continues to be elusive. The $50,000 reward for information has not led to any significant breakthroughs. Aside from the theory that involved Ernest Vaughn and the drug deal gone wrong, some believe that the twins had simply run away. This was the earliest and most persistent theory advanced by law enforcement. This explanation was offered to the family within days of the girls' disappearance and was used to justify the premature closure of the case. Police cited their age, the presence of the $20 between them, and vague rumors of family issues as evidence that they had left voluntarily to start a new life elsewhere. However, the runaway theory has been strongly refuted by the Millbrook family and those who knew the twins best. Both girls were described as homebodies with no history of running away or behavioral problems. They had a close relationship with their mother and siblings and left behind all personal belongings, including Danette's seizure medication, which she required daily. There was no evidence of planning, and the girls did not take identification or extra clothing. The family also pointed out that rumors about one of the twins being pregnant were unfounded. Neither had a boyfriend, and their older sister was a teen mom who maintained a good relationship with their mother, suggesting that pregnancy would not have been a reason to flee. The runaway theory is further undermined by the fact that neither girl was ever seen or heard from again. There were no phone calls, letters, or sightings, and their social security numbers were never used. The family's insistence that the girls would not have left voluntarily, combined with the lack of any evidence supporting the theory, has led most independent investigators and advocates to dismiss it as implausible. Another theory centers on the possibility that the twins were abducted by a stranger. On the day they disappeared, the twins told their mother that a man in a white van had followed them for several blocks and parked outside the gate of their housing project. This detail has led to speculation that the girls were targeted and possibly abducted while walking home from the convenience store. The last confirmed sighting of the twins was at the Pump and Shop gas station, where they appeared calm and untroubled. However, the presence of a suspicious vehicle and their repeated requests for someone to walk with them suggest they may have felt unsafe. The area where they vanished, Bethlehem, was known for its rough reputation, but the twins were familiar with it and had never expressed fear before. The fact that two girls disappeared together in broad daylight without a trace is highly unusual, and some investigators believe this points to an opportunistic abduction by someone in the area, possibly the driver of the white van. Despite the plausibility of this scenario, the lack of witnesses and physical evidence has made it impossible to confirm. The police did not thoroughly investigate the van or canvass the area for additional information in the immediate aftermath, and the lead has never been fully explored. Another theory posits that the twins may have fallen victim to a serial killer operating in the Augusta area at the time. Joseph Patrick Washington, a convicted serial rapist and murderer, was active in the region in the early 1990s and targeted young black women fitting the demographic profile of the Millbrook twins. Some advocates and family members have suggested that Washington could have been responsible for their disappearance, especially given the lack of evidence pointing to any other suspect. Despite the circumstantial similarities, there is no direct evidence linking Washington to the twins. His known victims were generally slightly older than the twins, and there is no record of him targeting multiple victims at once. Nevertheless, the possibility remains, especially given the pattern of violence against young women in Augusta during that era. On June 16, 1987, a disturbing event unfolded behind an auto repair shop on Collingwood Boulevard, just off Interstate 75 in Toledo, Ohio. It was here, in an alley behind the shop, that the burned remains of a young woman were discovered. The body, wrapped in a pink-colored cloth, had been deliberately set on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence and hinder identification. When investigators arrived on the scene, they found that the remains had been exposed to the elements for several days before their discovery. The victim's clothing included Jordache jeans, and her body was wrapped tightly in the pink cloth, which may have been used to transport or conceal her before the fire was set. The fire had not completely consumed the remains, allowing authorities to recover enough physical evidence to begin their investigation. A detailed examination of the body revealed several striking features. The woman was estimated to be between 16 and 21 years old, with a height ranging from 5 feet 4 inches to 5 feet 7 inches and a weight of approximately 110 pounds. Her hair was short, cropped, and described as strawberry blonde in color. Her toenails were painted a polished pink, and she had 5 piercings in each ear, each adorned with small round pearl earrings. These personal touches hinted at her possibly being younger and individualistic, but they did not immediately lead to her identification. The Lucas County Coroner's Office determined that the woman had died several days prior to her discovery, but the exact cause of death was not immediately clear due to the condition of the remains and the effects of the fire. The body's location behind a business near a major interstate suggested that the perpetrator may have chosen the spot for its relative seclusion and easy access, possibly indicating that the crime had connections beyond the immediate Toledo area. Despite these clues, the investigation quickly hit a wall. The woman was not carrying any identification, and no missing persons reports from the area at the time matched her description. Authorities entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and a forensic sketch was created and circulated to the public. The hope was that someone, somewhere, would recognize the young woman from her distinctive features or the circumstances of her discovery. The case soon became known as the Toledo Jane Doe mystery. As weeks turned into months and then years, the case grew cold. Detectives rotated in and out of the investigation, each bringing fresh eyes, but ultimately facing the same lack of progress. The physical evidence was re-examined periodically, especially as forensic technology advanced. In 2007, some of the remains were tested again, but DNA technology at the time was not advanced enough to yield a match or even a promising lead. The coroner's report eventually ruled her cause of death as a substance overdose with coke found in her system. This finding, while providing some insight, did little to explain the extreme measures taken to conceal her identity and dispose of her body. Why would someone go to the lengths of wrapping her in a blanket, putting a plastic bag over her head, and setting her remains on fire if her death was accidental or self-inflicted? Fast forward to the year 2024, we finally got a major breakthrough in the case. In October of that year, Detective Jason Mussery, who had long been troubled by the unresolved case, sought assistance from the Porchlight Project, a nonprofit dedicated to funding advanced DNA testing and forensic genetic genealogy for cold cases in Ohio. The organization agreed to cover the costs of testing, which traditional law enforcement budgets often cannot accommodate for older cases. This partnership was critical as previous attempts to identify the remains, including standard DNA analysis and nationwide database searches, had failed due to technological limitations and the degraded condition of the sample. The Porchlight Project connected the Toledo Police Department with Othram Forensic Laboratory. Ultimately, they were able to tie the victim to a family in Michigan, approximately 60 miles north of Toledo. On March 20th, 2025, the Lucas County Coroner's Office officially announced that the remains belonged to Tammy Lowe, an 18-year-old from Taylor, Michigan, who had been reported missing in 1987. Tammy's background included struggles with addiction and economic hardship. According to discussions and reports following her identification, she came from a poor family and was facing significant challenges in her personal life at the time she went missing. These circumstances may have contributed to the lack of urgency or resources devoted to her case when she first disappeared, and may also explain why her disappearance did not immediately garner widespread attention. While the identification of Tammy has provided long-awaited closure for her family and the community, the circumstances of her death remain unresolved. Authorities have not publicly identified any suspects or clarified the exact events leading to her death. The burning of her body suggests an attempt to conceal evidence, but whether her death was the result of foul play or other causes has not been definitively established. Born on October 1st, 1973, Megan faced challenges from an early age. In first grade, she was diagnosed with a mild intellectual disability, which led to her placement in special education classes throughout her schooling. Her mother, Sherry Romero, described Megan as a child who struggled socially. Classmates often mocked her for her developmental delays, compounding her isolation. Despite these hurdles, Megan developed an outgoing and trusting personality, traits that would later define her interactions and ultimately contribute to her vulnerability. At 18, Megan married and moved to Arkansas with her husband. The marriage, however, quickly turned abusive. While details of the abuse remain sparse, testimonies indicate that Megan's husband subjected her to physical and emotional harm, prompting her to flee and return to her hometown of Lufkin, Texas in the mid-1990s. Back in Lufkin, Megan insisted on living independently, renting an apartment at the Fox Run Apartments complex. Megan's mother later reflected on her daughter's trusting nature, noting that Megan's loneliness and eagerness for companionship made her an easy target for predatory individuals. This vulnerability was exacerbated by her frequent visits to local nightclubs where she sought social connection but often encountered risky situations. Such was the case on March 25, 2000. Megan began her night at the Electric Cowboy, a bustling nightclub she frequented. Witnesses recalled her dancing provocatively, a habit that occasionally led to confrontations with staff. On this night, she attracted the attention of an unidentified man who bought her 2 drinks at the bar. Descriptions of this individual varied. Some described him as a white or Hispanic male with dark hair and a cowboy hat, while others noted a white male with blonde hair and a mustache. The discrepancy in accounts would later complicate the investigation. Around midnight, Megan's behavior led security to ask her to leave. Sources conflict on whether she exited alone or with the man who had been buying her drinks. What is clear is that Megan, undeterred, proceeded to another venue, the Sports Shack, located just blocks away. There, Megan danced with acquaintances, including a bouncer who knew her well. She stayed for approximately an hour, during which she socialized casually but showed no signs of distress. Around 1:15 a.m., the bouncer offered her a ride home, which she accepted. They arrived at her apartment complex, Fox Run Apartments, at 1:30 a.m. Megan's neighbor and close friend, referred to as Kathy or Tanya in reports, had waited up to hear about her evening. The 2 women spoke briefly on the balcony outside Megan's apartment. As they chatted, a car abruptly sped into the parking lot, screeching to a halt. Megan glanced down and remarked, "I think that's the guy from the club." She then descended the stairs to meet the driver while Kathy returned to her apartment. Minutes later, Kathy peered outside and noticed the car still idling in the parking lot. Megan was inside the vehicle, but the driver remained obscured. By 1:45 a.m., the car was empty, and Megan was no longer visible. Growing uneasy, Kathy knocked on Megan's door at 2:20 a.m. Megan answered, cracking the door just enough to reveal a man standing behind her. Kathy later described him as a white male in his early 20s, approximately 5 feet 8 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a slim build, blonde hair, a light mustache, and gold-rimmed glasses. When Kathy asked if everything was alright, Megan replied, "He's a friend from the club." The man nodded silently but avoided eye contact. Satisfied by Megan's assurance, Kathy left, unaware this would be the last time she saw her friend alive. At 4:30 a.m., neighbors reported smoke billowing from Megan's apartment. Firefighters arrived within minutes and broke down the door, finding the blaze concentrated on the bed, and it was after extinguishing the flames that they discovered Megan's charred body. Her remains were so severely burned that dental records were required for identification. It was during this window of 2:30 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. that Megan was subjected to a horrifying assault. She was found bound to her bed by her wrists and ankles with a plastic bag around her head. Additionally, someone had slashed her throat twice. Led by Lieutenant David Young of the Lufkin Police Department, the case quickly became a high-priority homicide investigation due to the extreme violence and calculated attempt to destroy evidence. Investigators noted several critical details. The apartment door and windows showed no signs of tampering, indicating Megan had willingly let her killer inside. She was also wearing a partially burned nightgown, which former boyfriends claimed she only wore during romantic encounters. This led police to theorize she had invited the assailant into her home. Thirdly, the use of Megan's own pantyhose to restrain her suggested the murder was premeditated but executed with materials readily available at the scene. Forensic pathologists determined the cause of death as a combination of suffocation from the plastic bag and exsanguination due to the deep throat wounds. The arson was deemed a secondary act to obscure evidence, though its limited spread hindered this effort. Earlier in the evening, witnesses at the Electric Cowboy reported Megan interacting with a Hispanic or white male with dark hair and a cowboy hat, who bought her drinks. This man was sought as a witness but never identified, creating confusion about whether he and the blonde suspect described by Kathy were the same person. Investigators pursued several lines of inquiry, focusing first on men who had been close to Megan. Her ex-husband, Tim Purvis, was a primary suspect due to his history of abuse and the fact that he had been released from prison just a week before Megan's murder. Megan's testimony had previously led to his parole being revoked, and he was known to harbor resentment. Tim claimed to have been watching movies with his mother in Nacogdoches, about 30 miles away, on the night of the murder, but he could not provide corroborating evidence for his whereabouts. He also failed a polygraph test. Despite these red flags, there was no physical evidence tying him to the scene, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. Tim died in a car accident in 2003, effectively ending any further investigation into his possible involvement. Other former partners and acquaintances of Megan were also questioned. Each provided verifiable alibis, and none matched the description of the blonde man seen in Megan's apartment that night. Investigators even explored the possibility that a serial killer might be responsible, considering figures like Glenn Rogers, who was active in the 1990s and known for slashing his victims' throats and setting fires. However, no evidence was ever found to connect Rogers or any other serial killer to Megan's case. The investigation faced significant obstacles due to the state of the evidence. The fire had destroyed much of the potential DNA, fingerprints, and hair samples that might have been present on the mattress or Megan's body. Only the plastic bag and some remnants of the pantyhose survived, but forensic technology at the time was unable to yield any usable leads from these items. The significance of the nightgown also became a point of debate. While police believed it was evidence that Megan knew her killer, her mother argued that the killer could have forced Megan to wear it after the fact in an attempt to stage the scene. This theory was never conclusively proven or disproven. Some, including Megan's mother, accused the police of developing tunnel vision by focusing too heavily on the theory that Megan knew her killer and that the nightgown indicated a consensual encounter gone wrong. This, they argued, may have caused investigators to overlook other motives or suspects, such as individuals connected to Tim Purvis or others who might have harbored a grudge against Megan. Additionally, discrepancies in witness descriptions, particularly the difference between the blonde man seen at the apartment and the dark-haired man at the club, created confusion and led to speculation that more than one person might have been involved in the events of that night. In recent years, there has been renewed hope for solving Megan Curl's murder. In 2025, the Lufkin Police Department announced that surviving evidence from the crime scene had been submitted for advanced DNA analysis, utilizing new forensic technologies unavailable at the time of the original investigation. But for now, the identity of Megan's killer remains unknown. On the morning of July 28, 1984, Judy Ellen Weichert, a 34-year-old Oklahoma City resident, embarked on what should have been a routine jog along North Sarah Road. Judy was an avid runner and dedicated athlete who was training for a marathon. She had planned to complete a challenging 16-mile run that day. Leaving her home around 7:30 a.m., she set off alone as her husband, Steve, decided to sleep in rather than join her. Tragically, this decision marked the beginning of a series of events that would lead to a haunting, unsolved murder. Judy's route took her through quiet back roads near Sundance Air Park, a rural area largely devoid of traffic and activity. At some point during her run, likely within an hour or two, she was viciously attacked by an unknown assailant. The man, described later by Judy herself as a white male driving a blue car, raped and stabbed her repeatedly. The attack was brutal. Judy sustained 23 stab wounds concentrated on her face, neck, and chest, injuries that were nearly impossible to survive. After the assault, her attacker left her for dead in a desolate field near Sarah Road and Northwest Highway. Despite the severity of her injuries, Judy demonstrated extraordinary strength and determination in her final moments. Gathering what little strength she had left, she managed to crawl approximately 50 feet toward the roadside. For over an hour, Judy lay bleeding near the road as cars passed by, unaware of her presence just feet away. At approximately 9:45 a.m., more than 2 hours after she had left home for her jog, Judy's nearly lifeless body was discovered by two passers-by, a mother and daughter driving along Sarah Road. The pair stopped immediately upon seeing her and attempted to provide assistance. One of them rushed to find the nearest phone to call emergency services, while the other stayed with Judy. Despite being barely able to speak due to the extent of her injuries, Judy used her remaining strength to describe her attacker to the woman who stayed by her side. She identified him as a white man driving a blue car, a critical detail that would later guide investigators in their search for suspects. Emergency responders arrived swiftly and transported Judy to Mercy Health Center in Oklahoma City. Upon admission, doctors noted that she was barely clinging to life. Surgeons worked tirelessly in an attempt to stabilize her condition. However, the severity of her wounds proved insurmountable. At approximately 1:40 p.m., roughly 4 hours after being discovered, Judy succumbed to her injuries during surgery. Her funeral was held at Resurrection Cemetery Chapel in Oklahoma City just days later. Friends and family gathered to mourn the loss of a woman described as kind-hearted and full of life. Her grieving husband placed a marble headstone nearby engraved with the words, "My Golden Runner," alongside an image of a female runner and an armadillo. A task force was immediately formed to oversee the case, which police initially believed would be solved quickly given Judy's description of her attacker and his vehicle. Authorities issued public warnings urging women not to jog alone in isolated areas and offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. The task force's first step was to canvass the area extensively in search of witnesses or evidence that might shed light on what had happened that morning. Investigators interviewed over 1,000 individuals as part of their efforts, including more than 350 people who were considered persons of interest due to their proximity to the crime scene or other suspicious behavior. Among these individuals were roughly 400 owners of blue Volkswagen Beetles, a vehicle believed to match witness descriptions of the suspect's car. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no arrests were made in the immediate aftermath of Judy's murder. Investigators faced several challenges that hindered their progress. For one, forensic technology in 1984 was limited compared to modern standards. While DNA evidence was collected from Judy's body and clothing at the time of the attack, it could not be analyzed with precision until years later when advancements in forensic science became available. Additionally, leads generated by witness statements and tips from the public often led investigators down dead ends or diverted attention from more promising avenues of inquiry. For example, early suspicions fell on Judy's husband, Steve, simply because he was one of the last people to see her alive. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect based on both physical evidence and Judy's own description of her attacker as a stranger. As weeks turned into months without significant breakthroughs, public interest in the case began to wane. By its second year, only 2 investigators remained actively working on what had initially been treated as one of Oklahoma City's highest priority cases. Despite their persistence, no suspects were taken into custody or charged with the crimes. During their canvassing efforts, investigators received reports about a suspicious man seen near Sarah Road on July 28, 1984, the day of Judy's murder. Witnesses described him as a white male in his late 20s or early 30s with long, dirty blonde hair. He reportedly stood between 5'10" and 6 feet tall and had a slender build. Some witnesses also noted that he drove a faded blue Volkswagen Beetle and possibly had a circular tattoo on his upper left shoulder. This individual seemed to fit Judy's description of her attacker closely. However, despite extensive efforts to locate him, police were unable to identify or apprehend this man. He remains one of the most intriguing yet elusive leads in the case. Less than a year after Judy's murder, another violent crime occurred in Oklahoma City that investigators believed might be connected to her case. In May 1985, a woman returning home during her lunch break interrupted what appeared to be a burglary in progress at her apartment complex. The intruder overpowered her, stabbed her with what police theorized was a meat fork, and her before fleeing. The survivor provided police with a description of her attacker, which led them to Jeffrey Todd Pierce, a landscaper working at the apartment complex where the assault took place. Pierce became a suspect not only in this case but also in Judy's murder due to similarities between the crimes and circumstantial evidence tying him to both incidents. He was then arrested in connection with the May 1985 sexual assault after being identified by the victim during a photo lineup. Police claimed that forensic evidence linked him to the crime scene, specifically hair samples analyzed by Joyce Gilchrist, a forensic chemist whose testimony had been pivotal in numerous convictions at the time. Joyce asserted that Pierce's hair matched samples found at the scene. Pierce was convicted and sentenced to 65 years in prison for the assault, despite maintaining his innocence throughout the trial. He was not charged with anything in regards to Judy's case due to a lack of evidence. Years later, advancements in DNA technology exposed flaws in Joyce's forensic analysis. Testing revealed that Pierce's DNA did not match evidence from either crime scene, the May 1985 assault or Judy's murder. In 2001, Pierce was exonerated after spending nearly 15 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit. This revelation casts doubt not only on Joyce's credibility, but also on the integrity of Oklahoma City's forensic practices during that era. On February 28, 1989, the quiet village of Miyakaji in Fukushima Prefecture became the setting for one of Japan's most unsettling mysteries. Yumi Tanaka, a 23-year-old elementary school teacher, had just finished her workday and returned to her dormitory, which was located near the school. The dorm was a modest structure with basic facilities, including a squat-style toilet connected to a septic tank. It was a cold winter evening, and as Tanaka entered her bathroom, she noticed something unusual in the toilet bowl, a shoe. At first, she thought it might have been a prank or an animal that had somehow dragged the shoe into the toilet. However, upon closer inspection, she realized that the shoe was not floating but firmly lodged in place. Alarmed by this discovery, Tanaka decided to investigate further. She stepped outside to check the septic tank connected to her restroom. When she opened the lid of the tank, she was met with a horrifying sight: human legs protruding from the waste-filled pipe. Shocked and terrified, she screamed for help, which brought her colleagues rushing to the scene. The local authorities were promptly called to investigate. When they arrived, they found that the body was wedged horizontally inside the U-shaped septic pipe beneath the toilet. The confined space made it impossible to remove the body without dismantling parts of the bathroom structure. Firefighters were eventually called in to assist with extracting the body, which required drilling through sections of the pipeline. After hours of effort, they managed to retrieve the remains. The body was identified as Naoyuki Kano, a 26-year-old man who had been missing for 4 days. Naoyuki's family had reported his disappearance after he failed to return home on February 24th following a routine outing. He had told his father that he was heading out to run errands but did not specify where he was going or when he would return. His car was later found abandoned near a farm close to Tanaka's dormitory, with its keys still in the ignition and its doors unlocked. The body was found in a bizarre position within the septic tank. The man was lying on his back with his knees bent upward and his face oriented toward the toilet opening inside Tanaka's bathroom. He was topless and barefoot, but clutching a neatly folded jacket or shirt against his chest, a detail that puzzled investigators since it seemed improbable for him to have folded it while trapped in such a confined and filthy space. One of his shoes was discovered near his head inside the tank, while the other shoe was found much later on a riverbank some distance away from the scene. The septic tank itself added another layer of mystery to Naoyuki's death. The outdoor opening of the tank measured only 14 inches in diameter, too small for an adult man of Naoyuki's size to enter without significant force or injury. He stood at 5 feet 7 inches tall with an average shoulder width of about 16 inches. The squatting pan inside the toilet had an even smaller opening of just 8 inches, ruling out entry from that direction entirely. These dimensions left investigators baffled as to how Naoyuki could have ended up inside the tank at all. Adding to the confusion were several peculiar details surrounding Naoyuki's disappearance and discovery. His car being left unlocked with its keys inside suggested he had intended to return shortly after leaving it behind. The fact that one shoe was found far from the scene raised questions about whether someone else might have been involved in moving or discarding it. Furthermore, Tanaka's initial discovery of the shoe in her toilet bowl seemed unusual given how poorly lit her bathroom would have been at night. After Naoyuki's body was extracted from the septic tank and thoroughly cleaned, forensic examiners determined that Naoyuki had died on February 26, 1989, 2 days before his body was discovered. The official cause of death was ruled as hypothermia, compounded by a thoracic circulation disorder caused by his position in the septic tank. However, the absence of significant injuries or signs of foul play left investigators and the public puzzled. Police ultimately concluded that Naoyuki had entered the septic tank voluntarily as part of a voyeuristic act and died from hypothermia after becoming trapped. This explanation sparked outrage among villagers and Naoyuki's family, who knew him as a responsible and sociable individual with no history of voyeurism or deviant behavior. Over 4,000 villagers signed a petition demanding police reopen the case, but the request was denied due to insufficient evidence of foul play. Another argument that was brought up against the voyeurism gone wrong conclusion was the shoddy timeline. The teacher whose toilet was connected to the septic tank had been away from her dorm between February 24th and February 27th due to Emperor Hirohito's funeral, a national holiday. If voyeurism were Naoyuki's motive, it seems unlikely that he would enter the tank during a period when no one was present to use the restroom. One widely discussed theory is that Naoyuki was murdered and placed in the septic tank either before or after his death. Proponents of this theory point to several suspicious details that suggest foul play. One key piece of evidence is Naoyuki's lack of significant injuries. While police argued that this indicated he entered voluntarily, others believe it suggests he may have been subdued or killed elsewhere before being placed in the tank. The absence of defensive wounds or bruises could indicate that he was incapacitated either through physical restraint or poisoning prior to his body being disposed of. The discovery of one of Naoyuki's shoes far from the scene adds further weight to this theory. If he had entered the septic tank willingly, it is unclear why one shoe would be found miles away on a riverbank. lake. This detail suggests either a struggle or an attempt by someone else to obscure evidence. Some have speculated that Yumi Tanaka or her boyfriend may have been involved in Naoyuki's death. Tanaka knew Naoyuki personally and claimed he had assisted her with harassment issues prior to his disappearance. Critics have questioned why she ventured outside to check the septic tank lid in the dark after noticing a shoe in her toilet bowl, a detail some find suspicious given how poorly lit her bathroom area would have been at night. However, there is no direct evidence linking Tanaka or her boyfriend to Naoyuki's death, and both denied any involvement. Another theory suggests a political assassination. Naoyuki worked as a manager at a nuclear power plant and was involved in local politics. This has led some to theorize that his death was politically motivated. At the time of his disappearance, a mayoral election was taking place in Miyakaji village. Naoyuki initially supported Tadashiro Watanabe, a candidate who favored nuclear plant expansion plans for economic growth. However, shortly before his death, Naoyuki reportedly withdrew his support after discovering that Watanabe had been engaging in vote-buying schemes. This withdrawal may have made Naoyuki a target for political retaliation. Some locals believe Watanabe or his supporters orchestrated Naoyuki's death to silence him and prevent him from exposing their corrupt practices. The timing of Naoyuki's disappearance just days before the election has fueled these suspicions. Another variation of this theory involves opposing forces within the election who sought to expand Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant operations further into Miyakaji village. Reports suggest that Naoyuki opposed these plans due to concerns about potential health risks associated with reactor expansion. Some believe that powerful individuals within the nuclear industry viewed him as an obstacle and eliminated him to protect their interests. Adding credence to these theories is an incident involving one of Naoyuki's co-workers at the nuclear plant who died under suspicious circumstances shortly before Naoyuki's disappearance. This co-worker had reportedly uncovered safety violations within reactor operations, a discovery that coincided with a nuclear leak at Fukushima Daiichi around the same time. In February 2019, scientists and conservationists were left baffled by the discovery of a dead humpback whale in an unexpected location, the Amazon rainforest. The whale's carcass was found on Marajo Island near the mouth of the Amazon River in Brazil, approximately 15 meters inland in a dense mangrove forest. This peculiar incident sparked widespread curiosity and scientific investigation as researchers sought to understand how a marine animal ended up so far from its natural habitat. The whale was discovered by researchers from the Bicho de Agua Institute after scavenging birds of prey led them to the site. The carcass measured approximately 8 meters in length and weighed about 10 tons, indicating that it was a juvenile calf, likely no more than a year old. Its location deep within a mangrove swamp made the discovery even more odd, as humpback whales are typically found in open ocean waters rather than inland environments. Upon inspection, the whale showed no visible signs of trauma, such as injuries from fishing nets or ship strikes, leaving its cause of death unclear. Researchers collected samples for necropsy to determine what might have caused the whale's death and how it ended up in such an unusual location. Adding to the mystery was the timing of the discovery. Humpback whales are commonly observed along Brazil's southern Bahia coast between August and November during their annual migration from Antarctic feeding grounds to tropical breeding areas. However, this whale was found far north near the mouth of the Amazon River during February, a time when humpback whales are typically absent from this region. One theory suggests that this calf may have become separated from its mother during migration, which could have caused it to stray into unfamiliar waters. Juvenile whales are particularly vulnerable to disorientation and environmental challenges when traveling without maternal guidance. The most plausible explanation for how the whale ended up inland is that it was already dead when strong tides or storm surges carried its body ashore. Marajo Island experiences significant tidal fluctuations, with some tides reaching over 7 meters. These powerful tides could have propelled the carcass into the mangrove forest. Additionally, high tides under a full moon may have amplified these conditions, pushing the whale further inland than would normally be expected. Another possibility is that rough seas during stormy weather played a role in transporting the carcass into such an unusual location. Once inside the mangrove forest, the dense network of roots likely trapped the body, preventing it from being washed back out to sea. While researchers have not yet determined an exact cause of death, several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the young whale starved or got ill after being separated from its mother during migration. As juvenile whales rely heavily on their mothers for nutrition and protection, separation could have left it vulnerable. Another theory suggests that marine pollution may have played a role. Ingestion of plastic waste is a growing problem for marine animals and could have contributed to this calf's death. The Dominici affair is one of the most perplexing and controversial murder cases in French history. It revolves around the brutal slaying of a British family in 1952 near a rural farm in Provence. Despite extensive investigations and a high-profile trial, the case remains unresolved, shrouded in contradictory evidence, unreliable confessions, and allegations of procedural misconduct. On the night of August 4th, 1952, a horrific crime unfolded in the quiet countryside near the village of Lurs in southeastern France. Sir Jack Drummond, a prominent British biochemist, his wife Lady Anne, and their 10-year-old daughter Elizabeth were brutally murdered while camping by the roadside near La Grande-Terre, a farm owned by the Dominici family. The murders shocked both France and Britain, becoming one of the most infamous criminal cases of the 20th century. The Drummonds had been traveling through France on a summer holiday in their green Hillman estate car. On the evening of August 4th, they stopped along National Highway 96, approximately 165 meters from La Grande-Terre. The site was situated near a railway bridge and a path that led down to the banks of the Durance River. The family parked their car in a lay-by and set up camp for the night. This seemingly normal location would soon become the scene of a gruesome triple homicide. The killings were savage and chaotic, suggesting an act of rage rather than premeditation. Based on forensic evidence and witness accounts, it is believed that the attack occurred sometime after midnight. Around 1:10 a.m., multiple gunshots were heard by locals, though this was initially dismissed as poachers hunting in the area, a common occurrence at the time. Jack Drummond was shot first. His body was found on one side of the road opposite the family's car. It appeared he had staggered across the road after being shot, possibly in an attempt to escape or confront his assailant. Anne Drummond was found near the car lying on her back with fatal gunshot wounds. Both were killed with a .30 caliber M1 carbine rifle. Elizabeth Drummond suffered an even more brutal fate. Her body was discovered approximately 77 meters away from the campsite along a path leading toward the river. She had been bludgeoned to death with the stock of the same rifle used to kill her parents. The force of the blows was so severe that it broke the rifle's stock, which was later recovered downstream in the river alongside its barrel. A camp bed was found leaning against the car, and various items appeared to have been disturbed or moved during or after the attack. Witness accounts from early morning passers-by noted changes to the arrangement of objects at the scene, suggesting tampering either by locals or those involved in the crime. At around 5:30 a.m. on August 5th, Gustave Dominici, one of Gaston's sons, claimed to have discovered Elizabeth's body while inspecting an irrigation pump near La Grande-Terre. He later flagged down Jean-Marie Olivier, a passing motorcyclist, and asked him to inform local authorities about what he had found. Gustave also pointed authorities to where Jack's and Anne's bodies lay. However, Gustave's behavior raised immediate suspicions. He owned a motorcycle but chose not to ride it himself to alert police, instead relying on Olivier. Furthermore, his initial statements were inconsistent and contradictory. He claimed he had heard gunshots around 1:30 a.m., which he attributed to poachers, but did not investigate further at the time. He also admitted that Elizabeth was still alive when he found her, but failed to explain why he did not seek immediate medical assistance for her. It is widely believed that some form of interaction occurred between the Drummonds and members of the Dominici family before the murders took place. Anne reportedly visited La Grande-Terre earlier on August 4th to ask for water, possibly for their car radiator or for drinking purposes, though members of the Dominicis initially denied this encounter during police questioning. The family had been hosting a harvest celebration at their farm on August 4th, with friends and relatives visiting throughout the evening. This gathering likely increased activity around La Grande-Terre that night. Some theorists suggest that tensions may have arisen between members of both families during this time, though no concrete evidence supports this claim. The motive behind these killings remains unclear. Initial theories suggested robbery as a possible explanation. However, no significant valuables appeared to be missing from either the Drummonds' belongings or their car. Other theories pointed toward personal animosity or an altercation gone wrong between members of both families. One of the most significant issues with the initial investigation was the contamination of the crime scene. Curious locals and reporters flocked to La Grande-Terre upon hearing news of the murders, trampling over potential evidence before police could secure it. Captain Albert, one of the first officers on site, failed to tape off or contain the area effectively. This allowed onlookers to disturb items at the scene and handle evidence without gloves or proper precautions. Several witnesses provided accounts that shaped early theories about what had happened. Faustin Rura, traveling by moped early on August 5th, noted seeing Clovis Dominici and Marcel Boyer riding bicycles near La Grande-Terre. Faustin later revealed that Boyer had stopped at the scene when Elizabeth's body was discovered, but initially lied about his presence during police questioning. Investigators also noted several troubling statements from Gaston Dominici. For instance, he reportedly mentioned that Anne, quote, died instantly, raising questions about how he could know this detail unless he had witnessed or participated in her murder. Furthermore, during initial questioning, he mimed shooting and reloading a gun as if using a single-shot hunting shotgun, a weapon inconsistent with the one used in the killings. Superintendent Sebea met Gaston for the first time on August 5th near where Elizabeth's body had been found earlier that day. Sebea formed an unfavorable impression based on the man's tattoos and mannerisms, which he interpreted as signs of dishonesty or criminality. This bias would influence subsequent interrogations and decisions about Gaston's involvement. He had a reputation of being both stubborn and fiercely protective of his family. During questioning by police, Gaston confessed multiple times to committing the murders but retracted his statements just as frequently. His confessions were inconsistent and often implausible. In one version of events, he claimed he had approached Anne during the night with intentions. According to this account, a confrontation ensued during which Gaston killed Jack and Anne before bludgeoning Elizabeth to death as she tried to escape. This story was widely discredited due to its improbability. Gaston was elderly, walked with a cane, and wore hobnailed boots, none of which matched evidence found at the crime scene. Additionally, forensic analysis showed that the wounds inflicted on the victims did not align with Gaston's descriptions. In another confession, he claimed he had seen his son Gustave dragging Elizabeth's body into a hayfield after killing her parents. This accusation added further complexity to an already convoluted case. Gustave denied his father's claims, but later recanted some of his own statements under pressure from investigators. Despite these inconsistencies, investigators and prosecutors relied heavily on Gaston's confessions during his trial in 1954. The court accepted them as evidence of his guilt despite their contradictions and lack of corroborating forensic proof. As if this confusion was not enough, other members of the family became embroiled in a web of accusations against one another. In fact, one of the driving forces that led to Gaston's arrest were the accusations made by his sons Gustave and Clovis. They claimed their father was the man responsible for killing the Drummonds. In addition to the confessions Gaston made during his questioning, he also implicated members of his family in the crime. At various points during the investigation and trial, he accused Gustave, Clovis, and even his grandson Roger of involvement in the murders. These accusations fueled speculation that Gaston might have confessed falsely to protect his relatives from prosecution or punishment. One theory suggests that Gustave and Roger confronted Jack Drummond during the early hours of August 5th while armed with rifles after attending a party at La Grande-Terre. According to this hypothesis, which gained traction after Police Commissioner Chenevier published his memoirs in 1976, a drunken altercation ensued between Jack and Gustave over their proximity to the campsite. Roger may have assisted in staging the crime scene afterward by rearranging objects around the campsite and discarding pieces of the murder weapon in the river. This theory aligns with certain forensic details from the crime scene, including the crepe-soled shoe prints that were found near Elizabeth's body, matching the shoes worn by Roger rather than Gaston. Ultimately, Gaston was convicted of intentional homicide based largely on his own statements rather than forensic proof or credible witness accounts. He was sentenced to death by guillotine, a punishment later commuted to life imprisonment by President René Coty in 1957 due to widespread criticism of judicial misconduct during the trial. To this day, significant doubts persist about whether Gaston was truly guilty or whether he confessed falsely to protect other members of his family. Some theorists argue that Gustave Gustav or Roger may have been responsible for the murders while Gaston took responsibility, believing his elderly age would shield him from harsh punishment. Others suggest external forces may have played a role in shaping Gaston's confessions. Investigators were accused of using coercive tactics during interrogations, including threats and intimidation, to extract statements from him despite his limited understanding of legal proceedings due to language barriers and illiteracy. If you've been following along with this iceberg series for a while now, you'll know that it is several years old. And since its creation, a handful of mysteries have been resolved. This next entry is one such case. Nevertheless, it's an interesting one, so I'm including it here at the end of the video. Alexander Litvinenko's assassination in 2006 remains one of the most infamous cases of political murder in modern history. The former Russian Federal Security Service officer was poisoned with polonium-210, a rare radioactive substance, in London. His death has been widely linked to Russian state-sponsored operations and continues to have significant geopolitical implications. Alexander was born on December 4, 1962 in Voronezh, Russia. After completing secondary school in 1980, he initially sought university admission but failed. Instead, he pursued a career in the military and enrolled at the Kirov Higher Command School in Vladikavkaz, an academy for prospective Interior Ministry officers. Graduating as a lieutenant in 1985, Alexander began his career with the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs. His early assignments included working as a platoon commander responsible for protecting valuable cargo during transit. In 1986, Alexander's career took a pivotal turn when he was recruited as an informant for the MVD's KGB counterintelligence section. By 1988, he officially joined the 3rd Chief Directorate of the KGB, specializing in military counterintelligence. After completing advanced training at the Novosibirsk Military Counterintelligence School, Alexander became an operational officer tasked with investigating threats to national security within military ranks. He remained in this role until 1991. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the subsequent reorganization of its intelligence agencies, Alexander transitioned to Russia's Federal Counterintelligence Service, which later became the Federal Security Service. He specialized in counterterrorism and infiltrating organized crime networks. His work earned him recognition as a MEUR veteran, a title awarded for operations conducted alongside Moscow's Criminal Investigation Department. Alexander also participated in active military operations during several conflicts across Russia and former Soviet territories. During the First Chechen War, he planted FSB agents within Chechnya to gather intelligence on separatist movements. While Western media often referred to him as a Russian spy, Alexander himself clarified that his role focused more on combating organized crime than traditional espionage. In 1994, he met Boris Berezovsky, a powerful oligarch and political figure who would later play a significant role in his life. At the time, Alexander was involved in investigating an assassination attempt against Boris. Following this investigation, he became responsible for Boris's personal security, a position that created tensions due to potential conflicts of interest between his duties for the FSB and his work for private individuals. This association marked the beginning of Alexander's exposure to high-level political intrigue. Boris was critical of Vladimir Putin's administration and would later support Alexander financially after his defection to Britain. Alexander rose through the ranks of the FSB and was promoted in 1997 to senior operational officer and deputy head of the 7th Section within the Directorate of Analysis and Suppression of Criminal Groups. However, his career took a dramatic turn in November 1998 when he publicly accused senior FSB officials of corruption during a press conference alongside other officers. Specifically, he alleged that his superiors had ordered him to assassinate Boris, a claim that shocked Russia's political establishment. The fallout from this press conference was swift. Alexander was dismissed from the FSB shortly afterward. Vladimir Putin, who was then head of the FSB, later stated that he personally ordered the dismissal because, quote, FSB officers should not stage press conferences or make internal scandals public. Alexander believed that Vladimir harbored personal animosity toward him and used this incident to distance himself from Boris while consolidating power within Russia's intelligence community. Following his dismissal, Alexander faced a series of legal challenges orchestrated by Russian authorities. In March 1999, he was arrested on charges of assaulting a suspect during an investigation, a charge widely seen as politically motivated, and detained for 8 months before being acquitted. When prosecutors attempted to bring new charges against him after his acquittal failed, Alexander realized that his position within Russia had become untenable. The repeated attempts to prosecute him culminated in his decision to flee Russia with his wife Marina and their young son Anatoly. In October 2000, defying orders not to leave Moscow, Alexander traveled with his family to Turkey via Ukraine. While in Turkey, he applied for asylum at the US Embassy in Ankara but was denied. With assistance from Alexander Goldfarb, a biologist and friend who would later become instrumental in advocating for justice after Alexander's death, he purchased tickets for an Istanbul-London-Moscow flight. During a transit stop at Heathrow Airport on November 1st, 2000, Alexander formally requested political asylum from British authorities. The UK granted him asylum on humanitarian grounds on May 14, 2001. According to Alexander himself, this decision was not based on any intelligence value he might offer, but rather on concerns about his safety following persecution by Russian authorities. In London, Alexander reinvented himself as an author, journalist, and consultant for British intelligence services such as MI6. He also worked with private security firms and advised Spanish intelligence on Russian organized crime networks operating abroad. Despite earning income through these roles, Alexander struggled financially at times, but received support from Boris. Alexander authored 2 books that accused Russian intelligence agencies of orchestrating acts of terrorism to consolidate power under Vladimir Putin's leadership. He also alleged connections between Russian officials and al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri during Zawahiri's visit to Dagestan in 1997. Alexander continued campaigning against Vladimir's government alongside Boris while contributing articles critical of Kremlin policies to a media outlet advocating for Chechen independence. In October 2006, just weeks before his death, Alexander became a naturalized British citizen. During this period, he accused Vladimir Putin of ordering the assassination of Anna Politkovskaya, a prominent journalist known for her investigations into human rights abuses during Russia's Chechen campaigns. These allegations further solidified his reputation as one of Vladimir's most outspoken critics, a position that made him increasingly vulnerable amid growing tensions between Russia and its exiled dissidents abroad. Fast forward to November 1st, 2006, Alexander met Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun, 2 Russian agents with connections to the FSB, at the Millennium Hotel's Pine Bar in London. During this meeting, Alexander consumed green tea that had been laced with polonium-210. The poison was introduced into the teapots used to prepare his drink, making it almost impossible for him to detect any foul play at the time. This meeting was not their first attempt to poison him. Investigators later discovered that Andrei and Dmitry had made 2 prior attempts in October 2006 using smaller doses of poison at other locations in London. Alexander began experiencing symptoms within hours of consuming the poisoned tea. He complained of acute abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, symptoms that initially mimicked those of common gastrointestinal illnesses such as food poisoning or gastroenteritis. These early signs were indistinguishable from exposure to other chemical toxins or infections, which delayed an accurate diagnosis. By November 3rd, Alexander's condition worsened significantly, prompting his admission to Barnet Hospital in North London. Over the following days, his symptoms escalated to include severe dehydration and persistent gastrointestinal distress. Medical staff initially suspected thallium poisoning due to its similar clinical presentation and began treating him accordingly. However, as his condition deteriorated further, marked by hair loss, bone marrow failure, and mucositis, it became clear that he had been exposed to a far more lethal substance. The turning point in diagnosing Alexander's condition came on November 22nd, when urine samples analyzed using gamma-ray spectroscopy revealed characteristic emissions consistent with polonium-210 poisoning. The concentration of polonium in his body was found to be approximately 1 billion times higher than normal background levels, a staggering amount that confirmed deliberate ingestion. Subsequent post-mortem analyses estimated that Alexander had ingested around 4 gigabecquerels of the substance on November 1st. This dose was approximately 200 times greater than the median lethal dose for ingestion. Investigators also discovered traces of polonium contamination at over 40 locations across London, including hotel rooms, restaurants, vehicles, and even airplanes used by Andrei and Dmitry during their travels. These findings revealed 3 distinct contamination trails left by the assassins during their attempts to poison Alexander. The first attempt occurred on October 16th at Irenis International's office in Mayfair and later at Itsu Sushi restaurant in Piccadilly Circus. On this occasion, Alexander ingested far less polonium than during the final attempt, but still felt unwell afterward. On November 23rd, Alexander passed away after suffering cardiac arrest from pulseless electrical activity, a direct result of systemic toxicity from the polonium. Hours before his death, he dictated a statement accusing Russian officials directly of ordering his assassination, a claim that would later become central to investigations into his murder. Shortly after his passing, police launched their investigation. The inquiry was led by the Counterterrorism Command under Deputy Assistant Commissioner Peter Clark. Initially, Alexander's death was treated as unexplained, but once polonium was identified as the cause, it became a full-fledged murder investigation. Clark emphasized that investigators would trace Alexander's movements leading up to his illness, identify people he had met, and examine CCTV footage for clues. The discovery of the substance in Alexander's body triggered a major security alert across London. The UK government convened its Cobra Emergency Committee 4 times in the week following the poisoning to assess public safety risks. Investigators found traces of polonium contamination at over 40 locations in London, including hotels, restaurants, vehicles, and even airplanes. This widespread contamination underscored the gravity of the situation and raised concerns about potential harm to the public. From early in the investigation, Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun emerged as prime suspects. Both men had ties to Russian intelligence services. Andrei was a former FSB agent who maintained strong connections to Moscow's security apparatus, while Dmitry had served as a soldier in Russia's Red Army before becoming a businessman. Their movements during their visits to London aligned closely with instances of polonium contamination. Investigators concluded that the two acted under orders from Russia's FSB. Sir Robert Owen's public inquiry report in 2016 stated that their actions were probably directed by FSB Director Nikolai Patrushev. The use of polonium-210 was deemed a strong indicator of state involvement. Despite overwhelming evidence implicating Andrei and Dmitry in Alexander's murder, efforts to bring them to justice faced significant obstacles. In May 2007, the UK Crown Prosecution Service formally charged Andrei with murder and requested his extradition from Russia. However, Russia refused to comply with the request, citing constitutional prohibitions against extraditing its citizens. Russia's refusal sparked diplomatic tensions between Moscow and London. In July 2007, both nations expelled diplomats in tit-for-tat moves that further strained relations. Russia later proposed trying Andrei domestically if Britain provided sufficient evidence, a suggestion dismissed by UK authorities due to concerns about impartiality. In September 2021, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia was responsible for Alexander Litvinenko's assassination. The court found beyond reasonable doubt that Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun acted as agents of the Russian state. However, despite formal charges, neither man was arrested as Russia repeatedly refused to extradite them.